Well, it's 7 o'clock, so I'd like to call this study session of the Lakewood City Council to order. We've got some hot topics tonight.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to let you know that we're experiencing some internet difficulties at City Hall. So if you don't see the city manager, as you know him, he's losing his mind right now, but he will be with you as soon as we get it straightened out.
Okay. So we're working on Mr. Caulfield.
You do not need to wait for him. He just wanted to explain his temporary absence. He will be here as soon as he can get here. He's in the building.
All right. So there he is. Greetings. So our first item of business is the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners update. We have John Howell from the Cedar River Group and Pierce County Executive Bruce Dameyer. And they may be joined by others. Looking through the people who signed in. Mayor Victoria Woodards from Tacoma has also joined us on this. I don't see Mayor Josh Penner. Yeah, I admit Mayor Josh Penner from Ording is also here. That should be the whole crew. So when we get those folks up, I'll call on Mr. Howell to kick that off. So I think we also need to let Executive Dameyer in. So greetings, Mayor Woodards, Mayor Penner, Executive Dameyer, and we have Mary Kustra and Sean Howell from the Cedar River Group. Mr. Howell, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, and good evening to council members. We have three of our very active SHAPE steering committee members, and I'm going to let them do the introduction and talk a little bit about why they're here and with you this evening. And then to the extent we want to get into the details of how they are suggesting modifications to the intergovernmental agreement based on your comments, I'm happy to come back and talk about that. But Executive Dameyer, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, John. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It's a privilege to be with you today on this, on Heat-O-Geddon or whatever we're calling this thing. I just learned that we lost power up on South Hill. So I still have power, so that's all good at this point. Appreciate the chance to talk to you about this very important subject, and that is one that you're very familiar with, it of housing affordability. That is one of the biggest issues confronting our community, and one of the biggest issues that could rob our community of our individual communities of their unique flavor and the quality of life of our broader community. So that is why for over 2 years, mayors and I, chaired by Mayor Woodards, and I have brought mayors together from throughout the region, including Mayor Anderson and obviously Mayor Penner, to chart a path forward for us to do this in a collaborative process. We recognize that municipal boundaries mean nothing with respect to housing in particular, and particularly with respect to housing affordability. That if something affects DuPont, it likely affects Lakewood, it likely affects University Place in Tacoma. So that our best chance to have meaningful impact on housing affordability, in Pierce County, particularly when you're talking about folks at about 100% of the average median income or lower, that we're best doing that in a collaboration, working together. There's three primary areas that this group works together that we're foreseeing, and the mayor's recommended forming this group called the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners. And our A has a little cubed by it, which is also for affordability, accessibility, and attainability. And there's three primary things that we're focusing on that we see as a regional entity. One is advocacy down in Olympia, that we recognize that we've been missing parts of some of the things that could be available down there, particularly when you look at some of the housing trust fund dollars. Pierce County has not fared well because we haven't had the kind of projects that can compete well. So we want to do a better job, and advocacy around policy issues. We've talked with other cities around advocacy around veterans housing, veterans housing issues, and senior housing issues, as an example of a couple things. That we come together around policy, that there are a lot of things where we think if we work together, we can come up with some very smart policies that could really help our region move forward, some of which may be adapted by one city, some of which another city may adapt part of them. But if we all do a little bit of working toward it, we can have a combined effective on that. And the third one, and this is not necessarily required of every jurisdiction, and that is capital projects, that we want to be about action. We want to be about measurable action. We want to be about units constructed in our community. So this is all about kind of a high accountability group. At least if you know me at all, that's what drives me significantly. So what you have seen, we appreciate the work that Lakewood did around their review of the interlocal government agreement that we put together, and really appreciated your perspectives and have crafted. We wanted to have that. We welcome the chance to be with you and talk to you a little bit about that, in particular about some of the things that you highlighted. But I will tell you before I turn it over to Mayor Woodards, we try to be responsive to that. This is envisioned not as being, this is not going to be like Puget Sound Regional Council, where once you're in, there's a theoretical way you can get out, but practically you're trapped. Or Sound Transit, where once you're in for good. There is no legal exit ramp from Sound Transit. This is intended to be a coalition of the willing, in that we all see the need and we choose to come together and to move forward because we think that's the best thing for our region and the most effective way to address this. But at a certain point, if it's not working for somebody, they've got the ability to pull out. So in that respect, we have got to be motivated to produce meaningful results on behalf of the region, or this thing will die of its own weight, right? It has no guarantee of survival. Its survival is by us believing that the work we're doing together is very effective. So we really appreciate your feedback and comments on that. And with that, I would turn over. Mayor Woodards, would you like to jump in here for a second?
Sure, gladly. Thank you, Executive Danmeyer. Good evening, everybody. It's so good to be here at the Lakewood City Council study session. I now know why I always like to go first when I'm with Bruce, because Bruce covers everything and I could basically just say amen. So Josh, Mayor Penner, I'm sorry, you're going to get what's left over after two of us are done. But just I could really just double down on what the executive said. You know, I think what is so unique about this opportunity for us is if you just look at the screen at myself, Mayor Penner, and Executive Danmeyer, you see three completely different government entities working on different issues, working in different ways. But what's so wonderful is that we all agree that affordable housing has to be something we focus on together. And there are a lot of other things we can focus on together, but this is our start. It is so important to me as mayor of the city of Tacoma that we really look at the county as a whole, that we look at our region as a whole. Because I know that when people can't afford to live in Tacoma, then they start to move out to Lakewood, or when people can't afford to live in Lakewood, then they start to move out to Spanaway or to Graham. And we keep pushing our people further out. And I know all of us want to be in cities where everyone who works in our city, whether that is somebody who works in a grocery store or whether it's the president and CEO of a local company. We want everybody to be able to work in the community, to live in the community that they work in. And that's why this conversation is so important. I would say it's timely, but some might disagree with that because we are so far behind the affordability curve right now, but this is our opportunity, not as individual cities or towns, but as a county to come together and focus on the things we have in common, as opposed to the things we don't have in common. I think you already heard Bruce talk about that. Number one, this is a coalition of the willing. We're not strong arming anybody to participate, but we know that the success of building affordable housing in our county is going to rely on the fact that every city is engaged. And when we say affordable, attainable, and accessible housing, that is not a definition that we're making countywide and everybody has to live with that definition. We're allowing jurisdictions to make their own definition of what that is and figure out how we as a county can support you in building or in getting more of whatever you call affordable, attainable, accessible. But here's what we do know. We are stronger if we do it together. We can have greater impact in our county, in all of our cities, if we do it together. So in addition to being a coalition of the willing, its shape is shaped, if you'll take that, really by the idea that if we pool all of our resources together, and we're not here tonight asking you for $2 or $3 million to build affordable housing in Ori. That's not the conversation. The conversation is how do we leverage our collective voices and opportunities to build affordable housing in each one of our communities. And then finally, we are here once this is formally organized, not just to focus on the goals of this coalition as a whole, but to also support cities. A lot of our smaller towns don't even have the support they need to be able to look at what affordable housing looks like for them, or to focus on policy. You also heard the executive talk about how do we leverage what we're asking for from the state. But this allows us to do that and also support some of our smaller jurisdictions. And the other thing I'll just say quickly on the state level, probably a year or so, I think it was last session, not 2021, but 2020, we got together a letter that was signed by, I think, more than 80% of the mayors in Pierce County. And we sent that to our state delegation. And you would be amazed at how pleased they were and how excited they were to see that most of the cities and towns in Pierce County had come together to make this request. And so I think even as we look to get more support from our state level and potentially the federal level, working together and leveraging our collective strengths as cities and towns in Pierce County is going to go a whole lot further if we do it together. I would be wrong if I didn't say tonight that having Lakewood as a charter member of SHAPE is not only important to the entire group, but it's important to me personally, because you're a neighbor city with Tacoma. We do a lot of work together. This is yet another opportunity for us to work together to change the lives and provide more affordable housing for those who choose to call Pierce County home. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Josh, over to you. Or sorry, Mayor Penner, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for allowing us to speak to the study session this evening. There's very little that I can add. Well, I think there's very little I can add that the executive and that Mayor Woodards hasn't already said. I do really want to speak, though, to the diversity of the opinions that have been part of SHAPE, been part of the formation of SHAPE and this idea. The folks that have been in this conversation represent the entirety of Pierce County. This is not a conversation that's driven by one particular idea or one particular solution. In fact, I think all of us can envision a whole spectrum of solutions, whether it's policy, whether it's building, any number of things. And all of those solutions will work in some communities and not in others for practical realities and political realities. The one thing that we can all get behind is the problem. The problem is the same everywhere in Pierce County. As we look to try to jam 1.5 million more people into the Puget Sound over the next 30 years, we already know the existent housing affordability crisis is driven by a couple things. It's driven by policy, and it's certainly driven by supply. And folks can't afford to buy houses at any price level right now. And they certainly can't afford to work in Pierce County and buy those houses. And so we have an imbalance all over the place. And this formation of SHAPE is an opportunity to address that through coordinated action, through sharing resources, sharing ideas. What we've seen at the legislative level, when you look at the Pierce County contingent at the legislators, that when folks across our county from our broad diversity of opinions, which we have in this county, get together and coordinate on 1 or 2 items they strongly believe in, they can make a difference. And we can lead here in Pierce County. And what we're asking, and I'm not going to belabor the council because you have all read the foundation documents here, you understand them, but we're asking Lakewood to help see the problem and show other communities in Pierce County that the way out of the problem is to lead and not to just let it be. The solution to the housing affordability, attainability, and accessibility crisis is not going to be watch it solve itself. We're not in that type of policy environment, and we're certainly not going to see that as the solution. So thank you so much for hearing us. I know we're all here to answer questions for you. And is there anything else we need to add, John?
You're muted, John.
Thank you. My apologies. I said you were all three fabulous, and I would ask Mayor Anderson, would you like a chance for your members to ask questions, or would you like to go through the specifics of the ways in which the steering committee has modified the intergovernmental agreement based on Lakewood's comments?
Well, kind of as a segue to that, I think I just mentioned that there have been modifications, and then kind of punt in council members for questions. You know, Lakewood's concerns were centered on having a critical mass for broad participation, some type of sunset, perhaps a provision that would make it essentially self-dissolving if goals weren't being accomplished. We're in kind of about the perpetuity of the organization having been burned by Puget Sound Regional Council, Sound Transit, and others. And I'm confident that those things have been addressed, but not in the specific ways that Lakewood advanced. So this is an opportunity for my fellow council members to go to the source with respect to those issues if you have any remaining questions or concerns. So looking to council, looking for your hands. I know you're good at that. Well then, while they're thinking about that, maybe John, you could quickly go through and just on those, I think there's 3 or 4 bullet points, just say that there was some modification, and I don't think we have to review every paragraph, every sentence, but just give the tenor of the changes.
Yes, and I saw that Mayor Penner was going to jump in with something. Mayor Penner, would you like to say something before I do that?
I wanted to, if I could, try to make a distinction between something like Sound Transit and this. You know, the agreement for everyone that agrees, that is more or less set in stone unless there's a 100% re-ratification. So amendment would require 100% of the communities to re-ratify the intergovernmental, which, as we are establishing this, we're not establishing a taxing district. There is an ongoing commitment to providing some budget for the foundation, but it's not like we're creating a new tax or taxing district or the inability for folks to not pay it in the future. And so if this were to ever grow legs and move in a direction that I think would concern the folks of Orting, and might concern some folks in Lakewood, it would require entire re-ratification of the agreement. And you'd probably see an exit of several members and make it quite a bit less effective in the future. So my hope is that we don't go in that direction.
Councilmember Farmer.
Councilmember Branstetter had his hand up first, if he wants to go first. If not, I'm happy to launch in.
Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted to say thank you for all three of you for being here tonight and for all of the work that you have done in the past couple of years. I wanted to say that I fully support the goals and the desired outcomes of this effort, and I believe in it wholeheartedly. The nature of the problem is immense, and as Mayor Penner pointed out, it's not going to solve itself. I've been a big advocate of a regional approach to issues like these because our issues don't recognize governmental borders, as Executive Demmer pointed out as well. So the questions that I have are around the particular construct of the agreement, and what I hear, I love. I hear that we want to, that we're about measurable action, that this is a high accountability group, and we plan to produce. In reading the intergovernmental agreement, it's light on those details, and I worry that we have we say things and we're passionate, but I'm wondering if some of that shouldn't be enshrined in statute, if you will, that outline what review periods that we talk about. For example, I believe there's a 5-year provision that the agreement is looked at. The language seemed very pro forma. I apologize, I'm not a lawyer, but it looked like a 5-year review period for the agreement, just to make sure that there were amendments. I'd love to see that beefed up. That's a 5-year period. Our legislative bodies are typically in a 2-year budgeting cycle, and so the authorizing environment happens every 2 years. I understand that trying to look at the agreement every 2 years sounds a bit crazy, and so I think a longer time period is great. I'm curious about there will be an executive board and then a community council. And though they have differing terms, some are 3 years, not entirely sure what the term is for the executive council. And so how does it all fit together? I'm literally just focused on the construct and how it will work. Those are some of my biggest questions.
Would the steering committee members like me to dive in and you guys add on?
Absolutely, John. Thank you.
Yeah. A couple of things. The 5-year review. First of all, the steering committee talked at quite some length about each of the suggestions made by Lakewood. These were not casual conversations. These were in-depth discussions. And with regard to the period of review, the steering committee felt exactly as you were describing, Councilmember Farmer, that having to go back to every jurisdiction every 2 years would essentially kill the structure. The process of going through this intergovernmental agreement and getting all of the members to review and comment on and adopt this intergovernmental agreement is extraordinarily time consuming. And the notion of doing that every 2 years, the steering committee said, that's not going to create any kind of longevity for this group that we want. So I think it actually was Mayor Penner who came up with the notion, let's put language in there that says at least every 5 years. It could be sooner, but at least every 5 years, the executive board has the kind of conversation that in your letter to the SHAPE board, you said you wanted to have. What's working, what's not working, do we need to make any changes? So we want to take back through this gauntlet of council reviews and approvals. But we do that at least every 5 years. So that was the discussion about the frequency and the 5-year issue. And then your question about an advisory board, an executive board, and the terms and how does it fit together. So this structure is modeled after two other sub-regional structures that have been in place in King County, one for 27 years, one for 2 years. But both of them have a community advisory board structure that is not a decision-making body, but brings together people knowledgeable about affordable housing to provide advice and comment to the executive board that is the decision-making entity. So the notion would be if there's a policy, if there's a capital project that the executive board wants to get some community comment on, the advisory board is there to provide that, and then the executive board would make a decision. Does that help answer your questions?
I sit on a number of advisory boards, and I'm familiar with how they connect with the with an executive board that makes the decisions. I guess I was interested in the connection between the terms of these boards. If you've got a 5-year review period for SHAPE, and if you've got an executive board, I don't know how long their terms are, and then you've got the community board, and their terms are 3 years, 3 years with two, with the chance to serve 2 consecutive terms. And then your authorizing environment is working on a 2-year cycle. I want this to succeed. And so my questions are coming at this from a place of, please, let's put the right construct in place so that it will succeed. That's all. Just trying to figure out if we have the ability to set it up from scratch at the beginning. So are those terms all in line?
So yes is the short answer. The much more complicated answer is something you all know so much better than I, which is for executive board members who will be elected officials and or key appointed officials, city managers, city administrators, be a combination of those. There is turnover amongst that group, regardless of term, that will have to be managed. And that has been an issue for these other models that I described a moment ago, and becomes one of the roles of the staff is to be sort of continually orienting, informing the members of the board as they come onto the steering committee. The short answer to your question about are they in sync, I guess the steering committee didn't think that necessarily the advisory board terms had to be precisely the same as the executive board terms. There needs to be continuity in both boards, but they don't have to have precisely the same terms.
I hear you. I sit on a pretty large community advisory board. And when it was put in place 7 years ago, there was no thought to what happened when everybody had to cycle off after they had done their consecutive terms. And so we are literally struggling with how to replace 2/3 of the board. And so, so it's been fresh on my mind. So I appreciate that.
Well, great questions.
Also, I know that I read through all the documents, and I really appreciate the sincere conversation and chewing on the questions that Lakewood brought forth. I appreciate that. And I loved the focus on the comments that, hey, we're not going to be able to do everything at once. Let's start small and just start somewhere. I am curious about staffing levels though. It's a big lofty goal, and just honestly, just managing the executive board and that community board is going to be practically a full-time job. So I'm curious at what point you might need extra staff, or where some of the advocacy, or how can cities help? Tell me more about staffing.
Yeah, another great question. And just to be as transparent as possible, this was a balancing act conversation. You know, on the one hand, could have created a more robust staff capacity, 3-4 FTE, but that creates a cost that comes with it that some of the jurisdictions who are experiencing budget challenges would have been just turned off by. And so the conversation that the steering committee had was, what do we think is a good starting point, with the understanding that at any point in the future, a decision about increasing staff capacity or bringing on consultant capacity from that 1.5 FTE would have to be a joint decision made by the full board. And, you know, I'm not going to say 1.5 FTE is going to accomplish the world that a lot of folks who have been working hard on SHAPE hope it will accomplish, but it's a start to do some important work, probably picking off a couple of policy initiatives that it could do some research and work on for multiple jurisdictions. And if there are jurisdictions that want to talk about pooling resources, do some work with those resources on that. But it's a bit of a compromise, given where we think the many jurisdictions would be comfortable with making financial contributions. And any of the steering committee members, if I misspoke or said something I should have, feel free.
I'd like to chime in just really quickly. 3 quick points. The first, to give some evidence of the sense of urgency of an action focus of the group, even while we were trying to form SHAPE, right? We had 3 things going on. The first, we were crafting an interlocal governmental agreement. How should we be able to do that? That was a lot of work that we focused on. At the same time, though, we were focused on joint advocacy down in Olympia. And in that case, we did it largely with a combined advocacy agenda that was pushed primarily by the city of Tacoma and the Pierce County lobbyists. So we leverage other staff in where we can. And then at the same time, we wanted to lay the foundation for this group. So we, under what we call the Act Now agenda, we already kind of audited and gathered kind of sources of funding that are existing out there right now within the broader Pierce County region, and policies that are out in effect right now. And we did that because we want this group, once it stands up, to already have that foundational work. So that's number 1. Number 2 is the whole idea of the advisory board was born out of the fact that part of what we did as we were forming was brought experts in, developers, both nonprofit and for-profit developers and others, to help us understand the real nature of the beast. So when we want to enact policies, we want to know they're going to work. So we want access to that expertise on a regular basis. That is why they are some of the experts that made up in the advisory board. And the third thing is, while the staffing piece is part of the ongoing budget, the capital fund or agencies or organizations, jurisdictions' commitment to individual capital projects, that's a one-off. It'll be proposed, and each jurisdiction that wants to participate will have to sign up and say, I want in on that one. And it makes sense that some of them, you know, a project that is kind of on the border of Tacoma and Tacoma, Lakewood, and unincorporated Pierce County, you could see that the 3 of us might want to participate in that. But you could also understand if Ording said, you know, I'm going to pass on that one. I'll wait till I get one over near our community. So I wanted to add those things in. Thank you, Councilmember Farmer.
You mind if I jump in there real quick, John?
Sure, please.
So right sizing the staff on this is tricky. 1.5 FTE sounds incredibly small, like maybe so small, not much would be moving forward. But I think we need to put this in perspective as well, that 1.5 FTE is more planning than probably 2/3 of the cities in the county afford every year already in their budget. It's certainly a lot more than any of us are able or have been able to attribute to affordable housing discussions. And so it is this person or these persons being the center of the discussion act as force multipliers for all the different folks that want to be part of this conversation. And, this doesn't preclude folks from creating spin-off projects, joint ventures between the county and cities or between individual cities. In fact, these 1.5 FTEs would be perfectly situated to identify those and to create those bridges that create then those individual projects for, say, Orting that wants something in one way that wouldn't work in Lakewood. That I think is the power here. It's to leverage all of our pooled resources and identify the opportunity. So in that sense, it's not 1.5 FTE just doing the work of 10 FTE. It's 1.5 FTE finding opportunities for all of us to best, most efficiently utilize the resources we have on hand within our own jurisdiction. So thank you.
One real quick last point related to Mayor Penner's point. We have used for the last 2 years what we've called the staff work group. So Tiffany Spear from Lakewood, along with her colleagues and counterparts from most of the other cities who have been at the table, meet monthly, advise the steering committee, and we have had the conversation about whether they would see value in continuing that role going forward, even once the SHAPE staff are hired. And they unanimously said yes. That is sort of that force multiplier concept that Mayor Penner just spoke about. Having the staff at the table talking about affordable, accessible, attainable housing with the SHAPE staff, it gives a sort of a boost to some of that staff capacity question.
One more question, if you would indulge me. Have you thought about who and how will tell your story? I'm a communicator by trade, and so this is a particular lens that I see the world in, and it seems that you have a powerful story to tell. You've got things that you want to get done, and the more that people know about what you're trying to do, that you can access that leverage.
So I will say two things, and I'm sure the steering committee members will have things to say. One is that Mayor Woodards, Mayor Penner, and Executive Dan Meyer have been all over the county at council meetings and study sessions talking about SHAPE. And they have been extraordinary in the amount of time and effort they have given to talk with cities and tribes about this concept. So they've been the storytellers. But I would also say thanks in large part to Mayor Woodards and Executive Dan Meyer, city and county staff put together some initial documents, some pieces that could be used to talk about SHAPE 2 years ago, well before we were hired, well before there was an intergovernmental agreement draft. So there's been an understanding since the beginning that you're going to need some documents that can be used to explain SHAPE, what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do. And that work will have to continue once it's created.
Thank you.
Mr. Branstetter. You're muted, Mike.
There we go. Well, thank you everyone for being here to be able to address our questions. And I guess that I would say of the issues that we put forward to you, I'm really okay with all of the changes, with the exception of not wanting to set a minimum number of parties in order to start. I am concerned about starting small, that the structure of the agreement doesn't necessarily look to me like, well, it has ways to get out. It doesn't look that easy for someone to get in. And I think that we might end up having to deal with the initial group for a long time. In Lakewood, when we discussed it, our thought of, you weren't going to get all 23 municipalities, but that you at least ought to get half, or more than half. And we chose 14 because it got us to a 60% number that seemed to make sense to us. So I guess I'm wondering, what was the concern about? I read the memo, but I really didn't understand the concern about not wanting, not just to not set 14, but not wanting to set a number at all. I mean, this looks like it could go forward with 8 if we end up with only 8.
John, can you give an indication? I mean, obviously we're now making the next round where we're all prepared, hopefully, for council members to vote to join. So we don't have a specific number today, but we can give you an indication of that we feel pretty good about the number. John, do you have anything you can share there with us?
Yes. So based on conversations with both elected officials and staff, the range right at the moment is between 11 and 16. And the reason there's that range is because there's some councils, and your city manager has had his own conversations. We talked about this last week, and I think our intel is sort of roughly the same. There's some cities where the mayor or the manager administrator says, I'm not sure how the council is going to go on this. It's probably going to be a split vote. So we have somewhere between 11 and 16. And before I turn this back to you, Executive Dan Meyer, the other thing I would say is the first of these sub-regional collaborations, which occurred in East King County, started with 4 members. Today they have 16. And I think there was a notion on the steering committee's part that we'd love to get 60% or more of the cities, tribes, and county involved. We'd love for that number to be 16, 18, whatever. But we also think we could be successful with a smaller number, let the organization prove itself, and then others may decide to join. And Councilmember Brandstatter, with respect to your comment about it being hard to join, the executive board would have to approve of a new city joining. And then their council would have to approve the intergovernmental agreement. Those are the 2 steps. But steering committee members, what else would you add about?
Let me just, on that point, let me just ask. So it's your impression that, unlike a variety of other interlocal agreements that Lakewood is involved in, adding a new member does not include an amendment to the ILA and approved by all members?
Well, we can go back and get a legal opinion about that, but yes, that is our understanding. We do not have to go back and get every city to amend the IGA.
The other thing I would add is we are absolutely aligned with you in the sense that this needs to be a broad coalition representing different perspectives and different communities from throughout Pierce County. That if it were just a few, then it wouldn't have the power. And that's part of why when you think of, me representing Pierce County, Mayor Penner representing Ording, and Mayor Woodard's representing Tacoma, that's kind of a pretty good embodiment of some pretty good diversity in terms of kind of perspectives there. So that's something we absolutely value. And we want this organization to be judged based on its results, based on what it does. And that's so one of the concerns about having a 14 line in there, that could potentially give one city who, for whatever reason, might decide they want out. The organization is doing very good work. We're getting really good results and good impact. And we're moving an agenda forward for the betterment of the people of Pierce County. And because of a political whatever in one jurisdiction, we fall from 14 to 13, and all of a sudden SHAPE's got to disband. What we think we really should be judged based on, let's look at the results. Let's be held accountable to the results. Now we hope and believe that as we show those results, even those that aren't with us will hopefully come back along. But right now, I'm feeling pretty good if we can get, 11 to 16. I think in this type of environment, that's a pretty good representation. And that's why kind of Mayor Wooders, Mayor Penner, and I are working so hard to make sure we close the deal with cities at the point of signing. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. Well, Mr. Hall, one of the changes that the steering committee made to the ILA is they added a definition for direct service housing in the definitions. And I was kind of wondering why that was, since the term direct service housing appears nowhere else in the ILA.
Yeah, happy to answer that. It did appear in the ILA, and the city of Sumner asked us to define it. And all we did was we took the sentence that now shows up in the definition that had been elsewhere further back in the draft intergovernmental, moved that to the definition per one of the requests from the city of Sumner. Council member, I'm guessing you've been involved in many of these kinds of activities, and we received comments from a lot of cities, tribes, and county, and we're trying to steer our way to be responsive to all of them as best we can. So that was one where we just moved some language to the definition section.
Okay.
Ms. Moss.
Definitions, the broad target problem that this organization has the capability to address is affordable, accessible housing. Is there a reason why we didn't choose, since that's the target that we're going to measure against ourselves against, that we didn't choose to define what that means? It isn't included as a definition?
Mayor Penner, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that's, if you can't measure something, you can't improve it, and completely empathetic to that point. I don't know that you would find agreement on what those three terms mean between two jurisdictions, nonetheless 14 or 28. And so I think that is the biggest challenge here, is that, for instance, in Orting, when we talk about affordable housing, look, there's no houses less than 300,000 and no houses more than 800,000. And so our concerns around affordable housing are going to be entirely different than the city of Lakewood or the city of Tacoma. And so if we were to really knuckle down on defining those things, I think what we'd see is folks more or less saying, this conversation's not for me. It doesn't reflect our needs in Orting. It doesn't reflect our needs in another city. And to us, we want to make sure, as we seek to create a foundation for SHAPE, we're creating a structure that this conversation can live within, rather than trying to define the conversation ahead of time. And maybe that sounds a little ambiguous, but as we're looking at the diversity of opinion going into this, we're trying to create opportunities for solutions to occur. We're not trying to define the solution beforehand.
A great example of that is in Steilacoom, right? Their top priority is preservation of housing, particularly that which supports veterans and seniors. So there'll be a big piece of our agenda that is about part of that, but that's not, senior housing is across the whole county. but we've got to be able to be broad enough in our definition to support Stillicum and their objectives while still picking up Tacoma, Ording, Sumner.
So Councilmember Brandstatter, one of the, I'm sure you saw this, one of the things the steering committee added was some language about the role of the executive board, saying that the executive board will determine how it will track, monitor, and report on progress on the work plan and the timeliness of deliverables. So the executive board working with the staff is going to have to come up with essentially a dashboard of some kind, metrics, which will have some meaning to Ording and some meaning to Tacoma and some meaning to Lakewood. So, but that's a conversation that the board has to have. And the steering committee was not going to say, we're deciding what those metrics should be in advance of the cities, county, and tribes deciding who wants to be a part of this. I mean, this has to be a discussion that the members have about what are the metrics they want to use to hold themselves accountable.
Okay, thank you. I did want to circle back to Councilmember Farmer's talk about the message, because it seems that advocacy and success at advocacy plays a big role in how impactful this organization can be. And I think the comment mentioned earlier was previously the mayors had some common opinions, but that the lobbyists from the county and the city were relied upon to carry the message forward. And as I looked at the budget proposals, and while there was some comments about, well, the budget proposals need to add in insurance, was there a discussion about there really needing to be a budget for lobbying? Or are we going to do that from in-house resources of parties to the agreement? And that would seem to be a important expense that would lead to positive results.
So there wasn't a lot of discussion yet about what lobbying would look like in the future. There was a fair amount of discussion about, in this transition period where there is no formal structure set up, but a lot of us are at the table talking about how to create a structure. How can we use one another's resources around this legislative advocacy? I am guessing, others, the elected officials from the steering committee will chime in if they see this differently, but I'm guessing in initial work to start small, I'm guessing that the conversation is going to be along a similar vein. How can we pool our existing resources to work on something that the full executive board agrees to as a legislative agenda? But, you know, that's if the executive board wanted to come up with additional resources, that's a conversation they could have. But they haven't talked a lot about that yet.
Okay. I just had a couple procedural questions about why the ILA has some items. Under the executive board, it speaks that no action may be taken at a meeting except where a quorum exists, which is a pretty standard provision. But then it says an affirmative vote must be made by a majority of the board's membership, which is different than what is commonly done, a majority of the board members present. And I was wondering if there was an intention to particularly indicate that even if, say, only 9 of the 11 members are here, that it still takes a majority of the 11 in terms of affirmative votes to pass something. Because that was the language that was used for the advisory committee. It was a quorum and the majority of the members present, as opposed to a majority of the members.
So I will say, council member, you are the first person to raise that as a question. So there's no intent or hidden intent here. If that, I mean, the language went through multiple reviews with multiple lawyers, but you're asking a question that I'm not sure I can answer this evening, but
Okay, well, if it can be looked at
Sure.
to be sure that we don't have a result that's not the intent.
yeah.
Okay, to be able to go and do that.
John, I think Josh had something to add.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, John, and thank you, council member. Of course, there's different types of majorities for different actions, right? If you want to pass an ordinance, you need a majority of the body regardless of how many members are present. But something less than an ordinance, right? You could have different rules that would allow for that. You know, from this perspective, I think generally the philosophy is that we want a majority of the board to be present always. Otherwise, what are we doing? So we can take it back to the executive committee. I guess my question to you is this a deal breaker, or is this something that you think that could be improved?
No, it's more of an item of clarity I'd like to see and something I was voting affirmatively on.
So Mike, I might add in that from the danger of being a lawyer. There's a reason for having similar but different provisions. The advisory committee is not taking action that binds the group and not spending money. It's an extra safeguard to require the a majority of the body to pass something for action, much like Mayor Penner was alluding to with respect to an ordinance. So I think what happened was the lawyers were looking at it and said, this is a safer way to go for the body as a whole, so you don't have a rogue action.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And that's so just one last in the same vein. There is a provision to be able to we can all vote and sign it, and we don't all have to sign the exact same piece of paper. But the way that that's set up, it said that once you do it, sign your piece of paper and send it to the administering agency, but the administrative agency can't be determined until after the organization is created. So maybe instead of saying administrative agency, just choose someone that's going to compile it and certify that everybody did it, and we'll go along well. So that's all I have, unless any of the guests have a question for me.
I would just say, Councilmember Brandstatter, that you've given me a good definition of fine-tooth comb.
That's my role.
You have read the document well.
Well, and just so you know, council member, Pierce County has been the administrating agency and has been acting in that capacity. But because of some input, we decided, you know what, we shouldn't codify that in the IGA. There may be a situation where we will want to switch administrative agencies or something like that. So that's a little bit of why there's maybe perhaps a little bit of awkwardness, is the sense that there was this, you know, it's envisioned that Pierce County will be the administrative agency unless the board wants to change it to somebody else. So we'll see how that comes out. But you're right. That's your reading of the language is entirely accurate, that the board has to decide who the administrating agency officially will be.
Also,
I think we should point out too, that's the danger of not showing up to meetings is you get voluntold to be the administrating agency. So if you're concerned.
Well,
about budget, make
then I
sure
will
you show up to the
encourage
meeting.
Mayor Anderson to make sure that he shows up.
Councilmember
I thought
Brandstetter,
Gordon was doing that for the first 5 years.
Councilmember Brandstetter asked another question that my colleague Marty Koistra gave me a text on, and I think it's section 20 speaks to how new cities could join and become members, and it's a majority vote of the board.
All right, thank you. Ms. Moss, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you all for coming out tonight. It's good to see some of you. Haven't seen you for a while. I wanted to, a lot of my questions have been answered. So the one thing I did not hear anything about was the cities that are landlocked. There's like, say for instance, Lakewood, we don't have a lot of land to build out. We can't get rid of any more Gary oak trees, which is where most of our property lies. So was there any discussion around concerning the cities that are kind of landlocked?
So, Executive Danmeyer, you've gotten an earful about this as we've gone to cities. There are a number of cities who said, we don't have more land to build on. We're built out, quote unquote, we're built out. And we heard that from multiple cities. But then when you dig a little bit and start asking them, well, what are your affordable housing needs? Well, we've got to preserve housing so people can stay in it. We need more housing for seniors. We need more housing for veterans. I mean, there are needs not being met even by those landlocked cities who say they're built out. Executive Danmeyer, what else would you add?
Yeah, so I would, there's absolutely a whole series of kind of preservation strategies which enable you to keep that which you have and not exacerbate the problem. But I think there's also the opportunity, and we've been in some kind of conceptual discussions with right now, you can be helpful, especially where there's land maybe just across the border, right? You may not have land in Lakewood necessarily, but there may be land in unincorporated Pierce County, which can be used to significantly benefit the affordability issues in Lakewood, maybe in Tacoma, and maybe all three of us come together about those. So there's nothing to say that you can't contribute to a project that may be kind of significant outside of your borders, but you've got to give approval to it. So those would be the two ways that I would talk about looking at it.
Thank you.
Well, and the other thing I would add to that, Councilmember Moss, is that, I mean, Tacoma as an urban city is built out too, but the tools that we have to do some of the things like preserve housing and other issues like that, the tools we have are not enough. So just again, our ability to go to the state legislature together as a county to say, we're built out. These are the tools we need to address some of the issues that we're having in our built out communities for affordability. So while we can't build a whole lot, there are a lot of things that we can do to preserve. And then when people are rebuilding, there are some fixes that we can get from the state legislature that will allow us to do that better.
Great, that was a great explanation of that. It is a meaningful project for Lakewood. I can assure you of that. That wasn't the issue at all. It was just that where do we go without land to build on? So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Councilmember Moss.
Good to see you too.
So mayors, executives, and consultants, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's been very informative. John, unless you had something that you've missed that you need to add?
I have one last question, then it looks like Executive Danmeyer maybe will get the last word, but if I could be so bold, do you have in mind, Mayor, sort of what the schedule would be for Lakewood action on IGA?
John Caulfield, correct me if I'm wrong, the quickest this would be about 3 weeks from today.
Yes, Mayor, your next two regular meetings are scheduled for Tuesday, July 6th, and then Monday, July 19th.
So
So
probably be the 19th. We can agendize it for then.
that's correct. That would be my recommendation, Mayor, because we would probably, we need to do some follow-up with Mr. Howell and his staff to get all the paperwork and the agreements and make sure that we have all of the Ts crossed and the Is dotted before we bring it forward for your consideration.
I think that's your answer. Mr. Dameyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I want to speak on behalf of Mayor Penner, Mayor Wooders, and myself, right? We're here tonight, spending our evening with you because Lakewood's participation in this is important. Lakewood, you all know, is a very important regional voice in our community. And it's a voice that the broader community needs to hear. When I think of Lakewood, you certainly have some challenges, and you've got some challenges near you. So you've got a lot at stake within your community. But I also, when I look at how creative Lakewood is in using some of their funding streams to make things happen, that's something that we need to hear. When we look at the policy innovations and approaches that Lakewood and your staff bring to the table, those are all really important contributions that we need in the South Sound Housing Affordability Partnership. So I want to ask you to give this the most serious possible consideration. Your leadership as a city is absolutely critical to our success of anything in the county, but absolutely when we talk about this kind of collaboration around housing affordability. So I appreciate your consideration and look forward to hearing from you. If there's any other questions we can ask after this, please don't hesitate to call me, John, Josh, or Victoria. We want to make sure you have every bit of information you possibly need to make the decision that we all need you to make. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you tonight.
Well, thanks again to all of you for joining us. And I won't apologize for taking up your time because it was valuable. And I really appreciate that all of you could take this time out to be with us and answer these questions, because I think this is an important initiative. So we'll get back to you through staff to provide the detail and probably take action on this on the 19th of July.
Thank you.
Meeting, going over the work plan. And if we could dial in Chair Jason Gerwin and the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board members who are with us tonight.
Hi, Mayor Anderson, council members.
See, you're standing out in the park, Jason. We should come in where there's air conditioning.
I hear you. You know, it's a long meeting about housing, but a good meeting, important meeting. But you know where my passion lies, and that's in parks. And happy to have us and the PRA be here to talk with you tonight.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us. I don't know if everybody's been admitted that needs to be admitted.
I only see one other member right now, and I thought there were a couple more, but we can see what technology brings us.
So, yeah.
I'm trying to promote a couple people and they're not promoting. There we go. Sorry.
We're growing here. We have, is Mr. Lackady on your committee?
He is.
I keep clicking him and he keeps being promoted and then going back to the attendee list.
There he is. All right. Well, Mr. Gerwin, why don't you take a quick run through your work plan and then we'll have some discussion.
Sure. I wanted to at least first take a minute to introduce myself. As you know, I'm Jason. I'm the chair of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. And I think in this past year, we've all come to realize in the COVID lockdown how important parks are to our community. And also being the 25th anniversary of Lakewood, I mean, I truly believe that parks bring unity into the community is what we're trying to get out of the 25th anniversary. But I'd like we have some new board members, so I'd like the other board members to take a minute to introduce themselves and tell you what their favorite park is and why. And we'll go with you, Michael, first. Michael, did you want to introduce yourself?
You're talking to me or Mike Brandstetter?
No, I was talking to you, Michael Lackady.
Oh,
We're
okay.
introducing board members. I'm sorry for the
Oh,
confusion.
okay, Mike Lackady. You want to know what my favorite park is?
Yeah, an introduction.
I guess, okay, Mike Lackady, everybody knows me. I've been on boards for 20 years. So the only one I haven't been on is the Planning Commission, and I have no intentions of trying to join that. My favorite one is American Lake Park because that's where we do our yearly fishing expedition with the kids.
Great, thank you. We also, and our newest board member, Fred, is on the line. And Fred, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Fred. I work for Metro Parks Tacoma full-time, and my favorite park would be Fort Steilacoom Park. I lived near there for 11 years, and I was an avid runner during that time. Plus, my kids love the playground, so I've got lots of kids, and that's a big hit.
Perfect. I don't see any other members on. Is that correct, Don? Just the Michael and Fred? I'm sorry, Mayor Anderson.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's all I see.
Okay, fair enough. Then we're going to roll on with it. And so our accomplishments, although a lot of the year, most of the country was on lockdown, Parks and Recreation was booming and still going. A lot of Parks and Recreation agencies take care of facilities too. But a kind of a quick rundown of what Lakewood Parks, Mary and her staff, Mary, huge kudos, Scott Williams, the entire staff is just amazing. What they're able to do with that staffing level is truly remarkable. And I don't know if I can keep up with the pace they keep up with. But back in last June, we met with you, and we were just starting kind of the COVID. But we've reviewed the park code. We made updates in regards to motorized vehicles in parks. There's been some improvements at the South Sound Wildlife Area, and we got an update on that with the community. We worked on the American Lake Master Plan, brought on new youth council members. We took a little bit of time on it, but we got those trail updates and recommendations on the motorized vehicles on trails specifically taken care of. Something I was really pleased about was we recognized the Eagle Scout members. They came to a council meeting, and you recognized those.
We lost your sound, Jason.
Sorry, I must have leaned on something. Just too excited to talk about parks. You know how it goes. But you guys brought the Eagle Scouts in, and you recognized them because over the years, the PRAB, we approve 3 to 6 projects a year and make some great improvements with them. And to see them recognized at a council meeting was just fantastic. Back in January, we started the anniversary celebrations. We've reviewed the signs, and we might have a little question for you on that as we work through that process. The Harry Todd construction project, which I know is nearing and hopefully get substantial completion here soon. We did the comprehensive plan updates and got I'm extremely impressed with the energy and climate chapter and some of the work that you guys are doing on that. It's most impressive, and what Google brought back to the city was great. And just recently, this past month, we reviewed the Sealy Lake Master Plan, the Springbrook Master Plan. We got an update on that. And, we did get your feedback on the sign program, and we're continuing to work with that. With that being said, one of our members, longtime members, Vito Iacobazzi, he wasn't able to be here, but he would normally go on and share kind of what our work plan is for the year. And so I'll take that role and fill that in for him. But we're working on the Fort Steilacoom Park boundary line adjustment. We continue, constantly working on the 5-year CIP and updating that. We're working on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and parks and recreation, and working through those. Some new outdoor adventure programming going on. We got a new app, which is super cool out there in the parks. Looking forward to being able to get together and enjoy some of the 25th anniversary celebrations, and we'll do some park code updates as needed. And so something I did miss just because of my excitement is we would be interested as a park board in hearing, we try to share our favorite park with you, but we wouldn't mind hearing what your favorite park is at some point during the presentation.
Maybe we could do that quickly.
All right, fair enough.
Ms. Moss. You're muted. You're still muted.
I was looking at the wrong Mary. My favorite park is Fort Steilacoom Park. I walk there every Saturday morning, and I enjoy so much the work that's been done in there that you guys are doing, and that's my favorite.
Mr. Branstetter.
Well, I get to many of the parks on a basis of being able to do things, and I like them all. But I guess my favorite park is actually Primley Park, and that's because how it came into being. It was a park that was essentially the idea of a neighborhood that came to it, and while it's small, it's appreciated, and it represents community action.
Mr. Balke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine would be Fort Steilacoom. I just love what's been done there, and I love the action. And I live fairly close by, and I just love all the activity going on there most days of the week, and it just is just a jewel.
Isabel.
Thank you. Mike, you stole my park. I love Primley Park. I think it is the cutest little park that I wish I had a toddler to take her there or him there all the time. But I do love that park. And of course, Fort Steilacoom Park. How could you go wrong?
Ms. Farmer.
Fort Steilacoom Park and Wahop Lake, as you see behind me. I walk there all the time.
I'll be a kind of a contrarian. Fort Steilacoom Park is best. It's what I use the most. But my favorite is Springbrook Park, because when Lakewood became a city, it did not exist. Who creates an urban park? And we've added on to that. We've got waterfront. We've pieced things together, and we've created a sense of community in an area of the city that didn't have one. So I think for those reasons, it's actually my favorite from an achievement of the city standpoint.
And I think that's a strong point, Mayor. We were just talking in the previous discussion about being a built-out city, and that's something we may have to get creative in the future, because parks land is important, and that's actually how Great Smoky Mountains National Park was created. It was private parcels all at one time, and it was all purchased to create what is now one of the largest and most visited national parks. So maybe something we have to explore, and I like that one, Mayor Anderson.
So any questions of council for the Parks Board? Mr. Balke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, and I would, at first I would say, second, I like Fort Steilacoom, but the one I'm most proud of would be Springbrook. It really is, and it's been a collaboration through so many groups. So I just wanted to ask a question about capital. I mean, we talk about next steps. We've talked at length the other couple of weeks back about a downtown park, but I just wondered if the Parks Board has had an opportunity to prioritize what you think capital spending in parks, where that should be done at.
And so what I can say is I feel, and I'll let Fred and Michael answer on their behalf, but in my feelings is we are generally always brought into that conversation and included. As I've mentioned, CIP was on our work plan last year. It's on our plan this year. And so we are constantly kind of looking at that and reviewing new projects. The thing is, you know, we are good at getting grants. And so we got a lot on our list that we need to do capital wise. And so we're good at following those money and funding streams. It may not always be in maybe the logical or consecutive order or that sort of thing, but it's leveraging funding. And anytime you can leverage funding, I think you're doing the right thing for the city and the citizens. Fred, Michael, did you want to weigh in on that one?
Just that, you know, we have something going on at every park all the time. I mean, we're constantly improving everything that we have. And do we have a priority? I can't think of one right now. It's just that, you know, whatever the park needs and we can get grant money to work on it, that's what we do.
Okay, thank you.
So one issue that I have, it isn't as wonderful as some of the great positive things that's happened in the park, relates to recent incidents at American Lake Park. And just a couple of weeks before, I was doing a ride along and went to Harry Todd Park, where the situation was escalating on a Friday or Saturday night, I forget which one, where people from regionally were coming in and flooding in there. It was overcrowded. There was illicit activity going on. That one was diffused. At American Lake Park, we weren't quite so lucky. We want our parks to be safe. This obviously isn't a problem that's unique to Lakewood. It's unique around here because it's urban lake access, which is rare. And so it invites overcrowding. But I get complaints every once in a while from Lakewood, Ohio, to the mayor about some of their problems by the shoreline, which are remarkably similar. People are drinking in my front yard. They're blocking my driveway, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any thought of pursuing input for a safety plan? Looking at best practices, other words, where I know at one time there was quite a cruising problem at Spanaway Lake Park years ago, and they reluctantly implemented a parking fee. And it wasn't to make money from parking, it was to keep people from driving fast through there and making noise. The American Lake Park, that's a county park, has the same type of problems with overcrowding on hot weekends and drunken brawls. Is there a limitation of access, capacity limits? The waterfront park in Stillicum has no fee for Stillicum residents, but you have to pay to park if you're not from Stillicum. And a number of the incidents we've had at our parks have been people who aren't from Lakewood. So has there been any discussion of this? It's a long way to get to the question. And if not, would you consider adding something like that to your work plan and working with staff?
Yeah, Mayor Anderson, I think those are poignant comments. They're hitting, well, especially after the weekend. I know in Federal Way we struggle with that, and I can't say that the board has had current discussions on it. We talk about it here and there, but it hasn't been something that council has brought forward as a topic for us. We would absolutely be open to entertaining that. I can tell you, your excellent staff has already been out and hitting the ground. Mary's got a great network, and I know she sent out a chain of emails to the network.
And one of my concerns there is
doing with that, and something that's being characterized to me. One of the things that's been noted to me by my staff up in Federal Way is really it's coming out of COVID. They're characterizing it to me as that there's kind of this loss in social graces that is going on, and almost it's like people have kind of forgot how to act when they're out in public, and it's like this, I'm free and I can do, I'm free of COVID, I'm out of the house, and just let's let it rip. And so it's not just a Lakewood problem. We're dealing with it in South King County as well. And just like the previous conversation, it's something we got to look at and put resources at. And Parks competes for dollars with all the other departments, and COVID has brought to light the importance of parks and how much use parks get. And so I think that's going to be the big thing for you as policymakers is trying to juggle all of these needs and demands on limited funding. And as a board, we've got some questions that might hit on this a little bit closer. But Michael or Fred, if you had something you wanted to chime in there, we'd be happy to entertain that.
I would just say I echo what Jason was saying, that I think these are some common problems from what I can hear with, as an employee of Metro Parks Tacoma and what I see and observe in Point Defiance Park, where I work primarily. I think it sounds very similar to some of the conversations that I have in other groups. We're wrestling with when and how to implement paid parking, and is it appropriate, and how will that be received by the public, and where to do that and how to do that, and is it a parking fee or is it a park access fee, or what do you call it? And so I think a lot of the growing urban centers in this area seem to be wrestling with similar concerns.
Yeah, and I have great faith in staff at finding those best practices and implementing the ones that are appropriate. But then we did it too. And if it starts with input from your committee and there's public input, then we can honestly say, yes, we listened, and this was the best choice to make the situation better for everybody, instead of, even if it's the right decision, it being kind of a top-down implementation. So I guess that's part of my concern.
Yeah, no, I think we would welcome it as a Park and Recreation Board. We've handled other tough topics, and it wouldn't shy away from this one. But I think it's something that does, probably warrant further conversation. If it makes sense, we can just, I can ask Mary to throw that on the next agenda, and we can start that as some new business, and at least, get that ball spinning, so to say.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, comments from council? Questions from the committee?
We've got a few. I would like to defer to Michael or Fred to start first. I'll go with Michael that way. He's got a little bit of the senior memo. Did you have a question for tonight, Michael?
I just wanted to ask the mayor a question, because what he's referring to are two events that happened, and for us to get an understanding on, what kind of security we need, what it entails, or whatever, we would appreciate it if you would pass on to the committee the complaints that you get about things that are going on. I mean, I hear things about Silicon Park, the dog, people with off-leash dogs and all that kind of stuff. But if you're getting complaints that would be a security type issue, I would appreciate it if you forward it to us.
Yeah, in general terms, we could have Chief Sorrow pass them down, but American Lake Park and Harry Todd attract groups, especially on the weekends, especially in the summer and hot days, where it's party. People come dressed up, people come to drink, people come to fight, they become overcrowded, they want to stay or even come after the place is closed, and they park on people's lawns. It's a recurring problem. that isn't a problem at the non-lakefront places to the same, at least not to nearly the same extent. And there are it's a lot of it, I think, has to do with the concentration. There's a little bit of lakefront, more backlands, and a lot of people that want to go there on a hot day.
But it's like you say, it's supply and demand, Mayor Anderson, and we ran into this when the PRAB studied the street ends and what to do with the street ends, because people are clamoring for that lake access, and there's so little lake access that you got more demand than you have supply, and that's where we talk about being in a built-out city. That at some point, do we have to look at making an investment to provide more lakefront access for our public? It's just when that becomes the priority. But I hear what you're saying, and like I say, we'd be happy to look at it.
And there is a continuing interest in gaining control of the military departments fishing access outside the fence beach at the end of Tillicum. So that would, in some part, create additional policing issues because it's down a dead end. But you had some more comments.
Yep. Fred, did you have a question for tonight?
Yeah. I have an interest in how do you foresee COVID having impacted kind of Parks and Recreation from your perspective as council? I know we've been talking about long-term impacts at work where people are more accustomed to working from home now and more accommodating to that, and there might be long-term impacts in offices. We don't have to expand and find new workplaces, for example, for employees and things like that. But I'm interested in if you have any thoughts on how COVID might have impacted in the long term, or for good, as it were, permanently, Parks and Recreation or the city of Lakewood.
Any of my fellow council members have a comment? I'll lead while you think. I think one area that we've seen a trend in, I think you who are parks professionals may have seen this, is increased interest in youth participation. They haven't, younger kids haven't had the opportunity to socialize, miss the socialization from school. Parents working from home have used that as daycare, and it's becoming less, it's becoming a problem as to how you adapt when you change again. So a number of factors come together to, I think, create greater demand for youth recreation in the short to midterm anyway. I don't think that's a bad thing in the long term. I was personally a Parks and Rec kid. And it's the rec part that kept me out of trouble. You're molded by your own experiences, but I see that as something that's very valuable. So that's one way that I think COVID has changed the landscape. Mr. Branstetter.
Mr. Mayor, well, to address that point, I think one thing that the experience has highlighted is that we had put a great deal of our programming for seniors into the senior center and not having programs broadly throughout the city or in the parks to be able to go and do that. And the seniors got were pretty well curtailed in terms of access to Parks and Recreation. And although we did our best to essentially have something, it was mostly so that they could at least communicate as we were all dealing with the Zoom things to do that. But I think going forward, it highlights the need to have a bit more diversity in our programs for seniors, to look at it, and the long-term discussion about how will that shape what an eventual new senior center would look like.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll say something. Thank you, Mayor. I just think that it really shows how staff was really able to pivot and be flexible and nimble and really accommodate the residents and show them that we could still give them the access to the parks, but then change up some of the events and just really work with what we have. And I think that that park staff was really able to still deliver really well in very innovative and creative ways. And so I appreciate that a lot.
I never thought I'd be passing out treats to passing cars using a litter picker. But it worked.
That's creativity, though.
Anyone else? Well, thank you again for all you do.
You don't get me rid of me that quick, Mr. Anderson.
Okay.
Mayor Anderson. I had a question, and then there are a couple that the board had put together, and those
Okay.
members aren't here tonight, so I want to make sure council hears those. And so
You can't pause too long though, Jason. Okay, yeah.
absolutely, yeah. I'll try not to give you an opportunity, but recently we've been reviewing the park signs, and the park board is definitely looking to get a little bit more directions on the next step on those park signs. Councilmember Farmer has been excellent in helping us work through that process. And I know we got a little bit more explanation that it's probably a bigger citywide conversation, but we're kind of excited about that project. We think that's, the gateways were a good start now going into these signages, but I think we just need a little bit more direction. And so if you can provide that to us, that would greatly help us out. You can do that through Linda or, Mary or staff. So that was one. Something that we had hoped to try to get together in preparation for this meeting, but just, kind of ran out of time is, as we've been going through COVID, I've been kind of collecting a series of articles, and they're not just, opinion articles, they're documented articles that, are sourced, and, they talk about national studies and.
Just froze. You froze after national studies.
Like what is as good as they are, because they are some of the best in the region. And I just froze. Okay, am I back now? I don't want to pause too long for you.
Yeah.
But I've got a series of these articles that kind of prove and state the case why more funding and more support in Parks and Recreation has really shown itself in this time of COVID. And it's information I'd like for you to read, because I think it provides the ability for the PRAB and the council to have further conversation, because as I pretty much, the council members that have been on the board for a while, you know what my next one is, and it's advocating for maintenance. And part of my ask this year is, I want to challenge the city council to, as we compete for these dollars, I really, COVID brings out the light for parks, but what are some new revenue streams that we can come up with as a city, as a community, and put the unity into the parks and the parks department, because that's where our people are going. And so, it's great to have the CIP budget and make these capital infusions, but where it seems we're not getting the infusions over the years is on that M&O maintenance. And our parks, even though the world was shut down last year in COVID, our parks had huge usage, and I would say record-breaking usage in the amount of users in the parks. And more people in more parks means more litter to pick up. It means we go through more toilet paper. It means, we got to run that electricity a little bit longer. And we're great about the CIP, like I said, but we have got to come up with a solution for the M&O money and supporting the long-term sustainability and viability of our parks, because they look great now, but slowly over time, if you don't keep investing in them, they're not going to look like they do today. And, go to other municipalities in the region that have had those shortfalls, and you can see it. But when you come into Lakewood Parks, you don't see it. And I don't want that to ever change. And so That's my challenge to you, councils. We've got to come up with some revenue sources that are dedicated to parks and maintaining and sustaining our parks. I'm pausing here, Don, but it's to check my notes, so don't cut me off yet, buddy.
No, I'll, just a point on that. What would you send the articles you're referring to?
And it's Mayor Anderson. I apologize.
Yeah, I'm Don. Send the articles you're referring to our city clerk, Brianna Schumacher, please.
Okay.
Or you can do it through Mary, and then it can be distributed to the council members.
Okay, that would be great. And like I say, I'll try to pare it down and keep it down, but I've got 10s and 20s and 30s of them, and they're all supportive. And if there's something in particular you're looking for, let me know, because there may be a specific article I have. But if it's in regards to supporting parks, I'm creating a library. So the last is we got a great presentation from Tiffany last meeting about the ARPA funds, and I know we're still just trying to get our arms around ARPA and Federal Way and that money, but again, I'm advocating for parks, and how can we be creative and utilize some of those funds to make an investment to improve them, make them better, keep them viable, and sustain them, because that's part of what makes our community so great is our park system. But our park system wouldn't be so great without our staff. And the park staff, I talk to other people in the community at baseball, at scouts, and I never hear anything but praise for our staff. And so this last one is kind of off the list, and it's partly because I'm a municipal worker too. But, you know, in COVID, we in municipal government, we haven't stopped. We haven't gotten a break. We've continued to persevere through. Like you say, Mary and her staff have been creative, different events. We pivoted, we made things happen. But the problem that I see concern is burnout and just wearing staff out, because now that COVID's over, we got a whole new reality of, hey, we got to open back up and return to normal. Well, here we go, pivoting again. And, you know, it could be, oh, you just got to, you add one garbage can. It's not a big deal. But when you add just these little things, whether it's a garbage can or another Santa can or these little things, it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And my concern is one, we've leaned on staff real heavily this year. And like I say, it's not your parks department, it's your community development department, it's your public works department. They've all been stretched and thin. And, you know, could you use some of those ARPA dollars to say, hey, here's a couple personal days for the year because you've been giving it through. I'm thinking creative ways to support staff. You know, I'm supportive of that, not just the parks department, because all of the staff in Lakewood do a yeoman's job to make us what I believe is the best community in the South Sound. And so with that being said, Mayor Anderson, council members, you guys have always given the Parks Department great support. We appreciate that support, and we just ask for that continued support. And in these times, remember what got us through COVID, and that's parks. That's my pause, Don. I'll kick it back to you.
Well, Mr. Branster has a question or comment.
Yeah, I would just comment about your ask about the sign proposal.
Sure.
And I guess that I will tell you is that we are in a mode of where we are looking to try to be somewhat consistent and focus on a consistent branding of all the different means of communication about the city that we have, and so while park signs don't have to be exactly like the signs for other things, the proposal was ventured very uniquely away from gateway signs and other things that we are, both in terms of color and design, which was why I think we wanted you to take another look at it.
Yeah, understood. And like I say, we're excited about the signs. We understood why it got kicked back. Councilmember Farmer is has done a great job helping us work through that and understand it, because at first maybe we didn't understand it. We thought we kind of made a pick and like that was going to move forward, but she dialed it in for us, and we understand it. We want to make sure we're fulfilling our obligations. We're excited about the new sign program, and so when you solicit our input, we try to get it back to you and do it with due care. So,
anyone else? And then you get your the board gets its annual 100% salary increase. And I wasn't that good at multiplication. That's true. No, I was good at multiplication. That's why we do that. But thank you again for all you do. And we're particularly fortunate that we have such a high quality group with an amazing amount of professional skill, so that adds a lot to our parks and our community. And we appreciate all you do, and keep up the great work.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. Thank you, City Council members. We appreciate your support.
Thank you. And now we move to an update on prosecution services. And for this, we have City Attorney Heidi Wachter and Prosecutor Johnson.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor Anderson and members of the council. I am your City Attorney, Heidi Wachter, and joining me is Samantha Johnson, who is your City Prosecutor. And tonight we're going to give you probably the most complete report on prosecution that we've given in the time that I've been here. I know that we come to you from time to time when you're aware of a real community need, such as when we've done things with strangulation and domestic violence cases and looked for enhanced penalties for that. And when children are present at domestic violence, this council's always been very responsive when there's a need like that. Tonight, we're hoping to form a kind of a soup to nuts, if you will, of the whole program, including the resources, the authority of the office, and what is coming out of your investment in our program. So the memo in your packet, we debated, and Samantha said that she would not stand by if I read it line for line to you. So you will see in your packet, and hopefully Alicia is able to share it on the screen, our PowerPoint, which basically starts with the introduction I've just given you. We are going to get into some of the detail though. And one is that from the perspective of a prosecutor, you are the community. You know, when you think about attorneys, they always have a client. And for us, the client is the community, and you all represent that community. So you also are not, though, the prosecutor. And I wanted to touch on prosecutorial discretion because it's one of those terms that gets bounced around a little bit, and people don't always have a full appreciation for what it really means. Prosecutorial discretion means that Samantha, as the prosecutor, can determine whether and when to file charges, whether and when to plea bargain, and she will certainly consider the policies of the council and the community. She will consider the resources available. She will consider public safety. But just when you think, okay, we're going to have no deals on a particular kind of case, you find out the story behind one particular person's situation, and you realize that you're not going to get the ends of justice pursuing it the way you thought you were, or that pursuing a case might be a pointless effort, or that it has a disproportionate impact on a victim to force them to take the stand in order to get the outcome that you want. A lot of times for a prosecutor, it's the what is it going to take to get this person the message factor. And for the city of Lakewood, you may remember it was probably about a year or two ago, we had someone who could not stop graffitiing things in Lakewood. And we ultimately put that person in jail for a year. It took a little while to get there because that's not considered always the most dangerous crime. But this person kept pushing the envelope. And so that individual, what it took was a year in jail. We look at the available resources, the court's capacity, the trial experience that we've each individually had. Because of the trials that we've done before, we know what a jury may or may not be willing to convict somebody on. We look at evidentiary challenges. We look at unintended consequences. We look at contrition. If we have somebody before us that's truly looking like they're trying to get their act together and pay all their fines, we try to take that into account. But the prosecutorial discretion is truly within the province of the prosecutor. And so while we definitely want to understand what the community's needs are and what helps with community safety, each individual case is going to be decided on its own merits. So if we could go to the next slide. We know what the authority of the prosecutor is. In terms of what our caseload looks like, the caseload is dropping. And if you look at page, I think it's 49 of your materials, I actually made a chart, which I'm so proud of because I'm not very skilled with Excel, but the numbers are accurate and they do play out the way that it looks. And so when you look at a curve like that, one of the questions is, well, okay, that's COVID. COVID might be some of it. Is that because we had one of our cities go to a different service provider? And that might be some of it. But when we look at the overall picture, and you'll see the detail in the report, we anticipate maybe not continued drop, but we do not expect a huge bounce back in the caseload. We think that the numbers are going to stay maximum somewhere between that 2020 and 2019 number, and possibly even lower than that. One of the things that we talked about in our paper to you is that for a prosecutor, and this is different than for defense attorneys, for the prosecutor, the way that we staff prosecution is by calendar. So until that number drops to a point where we're combining calendars and maybe not having every afternoon have a calendar, that's when I look at what the staffing differences are. If there's 20 cases on a calendar, if there's 10 cases on a calendar, I put a prosecutor into that courtroom. So for us, the resources don't change until some of those, the way that you handle the caseload changes. If we could go to the next slide, please. So you know what our volume is, you know what our authority is. Your resource investment, what you've put into this, and this is included in a little more detail in your materials, is that you've got 2 prosecutors, but you have a total department of 9.5 people, 4 of which are attorneys. And your 2 attorneys that are not assigned to prosecution are experienced prosecutors. It may be historical experience, but it is sufficient that we can get into court if we really have to and help cover things. If you've been around long enough, you know that several years ago, we were using contract prosecution services. At the time, it was very economical for us because the market was such that there were lots of attorneys looking for experience. When that started to turn, we went to in-house because we were having trouble keeping sort of a stable staffing in our prosecution function. So now that we've gone to in-house, we've got still, it's within the same economic footprint of what we were doing before. And it's all being covered. And as you can see, your resource allocation is competitive. The cities that were chosen here are the ones that we typically use as comparable cities when we're doing negotiation. So with 4 attorneys, everyone's a generalist, even though we have our own sort of specific assignments. And Samantha is going to talk a little bit about between the authority and the caseload and the resource allocation, what we're doing with that. So if you could go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Samantha.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm excited to be here with you guys this evening, even though in the late hour, just to kind of share with you guys a bit about the prosecution program here in Lakewood and be available for any questions that you may have. So on the slide here, indicating prosecution significant charges, there's 3 different sort of subtopics. We're going to talk about those, but intertwined in those may just be some of the customer service and resources that the legal department uses. So I'd say our largest volume of cases would be both domestic violence and driving while under the influence. So with domestic violence, unfortunately, the data does support the fact that DV charges have been DV charges are lower from 2020 to 2021 due to a delay or no reporting at all. The shelters are seeing this information, different community partners, Crystal Judson, YWCA, but our office has kept up with our role in contacting domestic violence victims when police reports are referred to us. So as you guys are aware, we do have a grant-funded position. That individual is solely responsible for contacting the domestic violence victims, reaching out to them, and helping them walk through this process. That's part of that customer service piece that we provide here in the legal department. The office assistant's role is not necessarily one of an advocate. It's actually specifically not an advocate. We partner with the Crystal Judson Center and YWCA to provide those wraparound services to make sure the victim's able to get access to resources she may need, safety planning, all of that. Our in-house office assistant is primarily to help her or him walk through the criminal justice process with next up is an arraignment, next up is a pretrial. We're now looking at sentencing, and here's, you know, your ability as the victim to be heard. In addition to helping the victim through that process, that office assistant also, you know, provides them different paperwork, confirms their availability for trial. So that person's integral to our department in providing those services to the domestic violence victims. Of course, the other in-house prosecutor and myself are available for them as questions may arise. Additionally, our second largest case volume would be driving under the influence. In the memo that we provided you, there's some information about our Washington State Toxicology Lab. So in most DUI cases, you're going to see a piece of forensic evidence. That's either going to be a breath test, like when you blow in the instrument, if it's an alcohol DUI, or if someone elects not to blow in the instrument, or it's a drug DUI, the officers have the ability to get a search warrant to test an individual's blood for illegal substances. Right now, the Tox Lab is operating on a significant backlog. They're dealing with resource constraints among many other state departments, but they were dealing with furloughs, and what that has translated to here for our department is about a 5 to 12 month delay in receiving that critical piece of evidence. The city could proceed and file these charges without that piece of evidence, but it's truly something that jurors look for, right? What's the number? What was the drug? To just go solely off of an officer's observations or citizen's observations may be a possibility. However, it is the most competent and neutral piece of evidence that we have. It's a piece of science that, in my opinion, is integral for a successful DUI prosecution. So our office has been, in the large majority of cases, putting the cases that we don't have the forensic piece of evidence yet in a different file to review once we get that piece of evidence. As a prosecutor, we only have 90 days to bring someone to trial unless they waive that speedy trial right. As the state, you have very limited opportunities to continue past that 90 days, and the case law is kind of trending towards not allowing it for forensic testing. So, so far it hasn't been a community safety concern here, and well, let me back that up. There's always a community safety concern. You know, swift and certain prosecution is the best to deter future behavior. However, we haven't seen an instance where we haven't filed on someone and then a tragedy has later occurred. There are individuals, I've done it twice since I've been here, where we can reach out to the manager at the toxicology lab and request a rush result of the blood sample. They do have a pretty high standard because they do service the entire state of Washington. So they want to know about that person's driving record, why this should receive elevation in front of other cases that may have been waiting there for several months up to a year. So that is something that we can do. In regards to possession of controlled substance, Heidi, is this where you wanted to jump in about the Blake decision?
Yes, this council was very proactive when the Blake decision came out and realizing that there were, I believe at the time, 4 competing bills at the state legislature, that led to some concern about whether or not anything was going to come out the other end. This council passed local legislation making possession of controlled substances a gross misdemeanor in the city of Lakewood. At that time, there was sort of an even bet as to whether or not the state would try to argue that we were preempted because they didn't have any competing law to argue with. However, the state has passed legislation that now makes possession of controlled substances for the next 2 years a misdemeanor, which cannot be referred for prosecution until the 3rd time the person is caught. The first 2 times police are required to refer to services. And there is a section of the RCW that talks about preemption of the field. RCW 6950-608 specifically says that the entire field is preempted for purposes of drug laws. And now that the state has one, I believe that we are part of that preemption. And my recommendation to alleviate any confusion about the 2 different laws is that we go ahead and repeal the one we had on the books. It made complete sense at the time. It was understandable given where the state legislature was at when we passed it to prevent having just everything be legal in the city. And now I think that we have to be subject to the state law. So my plan was to bring forward something for the council so that we would be operating with the state law again. Those cases, when they do come forward for prosecution, will come to this office under the new law. But it will be as a misdemeanor. And then I believe 2 or 3 years out, it's set to become an infraction, civil infraction for any type of drug possession.
That's correct. Thank you, Heidi. And just on that note, you know, it's uncertain at this point what the volume increase may be when those cases could actually be referred to us. As Heidi had indicated, the first 2 contacts by law enforcement, the statute states shall, so the officers have to refer that individual to services. It's only upon the 3rd documented contact where the prior 2 have resulted in a referral to services that I would be able to review it for charging. So that's just something to keep in mind and how the future will unfold. At this point, I'm going to move on to our last slide here and just talk about different prosecution programs that we have, which are our Veterans Court, which is a therapeutic court, and then our Friendship Diversion. So Lakewood does have a wonderful, diverse Veterans Court here. It is 100% grant funded, has a team of, our team's large. It deals with both court, defense, probation, the Veterans Association. So there is a large collaboration effort among different government entities. I did check with the probation department to ask historically how many participants we've had in the program. We've had 23 participants, 17 have graduated the program successfully, 2 have not, and then there are 4 currently in the program. The thing that's important to highlight about Veterans Court, certainly Washington is moving towards more therapeutic court options. However, they are very costly, and it is currently on a grant, as I indicated, but looking to maintain that court once we're outside grant funding is something that would be costly. Additionally, I'm not certain whether or not we would have the numbers to support the cost associated with it. And speaking with our Veterans Court team, currently we have a predisposition court, which means when they enter the court, it's not yet a conviction, and they do the treatment that's needed. And if they complete the program, then their case gets dismissed. So it never reports as a conviction on their record. I have offered to open it up to post adjudication individuals. So that would mean plead guilty and to avoid jail time, do all of this treatment. So the carrot to me is let's not do jail time in certain cases where we can avoid them. With DUIs, there are mandatory minimums that people have to serve pursuant to the RCW. But the team seems concerned that individuals aren't going to want to enter the program, or perhaps defense would not encourage them to enter with that sort of incentive. So with the cost associated with running therapeutic courts, I'm not certain we're in a position where we would have a large participation. But certainly, you know, I wouldn't close the door. I'd be happy to talk about that with anyone. But it is important to know that the prosecutor is the gatekeeper of that program, meaning there are statutes that guide who is absolutely not allowed to enter a therapeutic court. But when somebody comes to me with a candidate that is a veteran and would qualify, it is solely my decision as the prosecutor whether or not to invite that person into the program. I look at their criminal record, their amenability to treatment. They also meet with probation prior to my recommendation to kind of get a better understanding of where they're coming from and what specific treatment needs that they do have. And so on a totally different note, friendship diversion is pre-filing. So with Veterans Court, the case has already been filed, they're in the system. With friendship diversion, this allows the prosecutor to divert charges prior to ever filing. Predominantly, what kind of charges we are referring are things such as theft from big box retailers when items are recovered. Oftentimes when loss prevention goes and contacts the subject, they recover all of the items. Also, we've sent it for reckless driving cases. There's limited number, like an assault if it's roommates and there was no injury occurred, malicious mischief crimes. And right now it's Pierce County Friendship Diversion that runs that program. They do have a list of, if it's this crime, here's what you have to do in order to successfully complete the program. They contact the participant and invite them to come into the program. They have them sign an agreement. If they finish that agreement, they send us a letter here at the prosecutor's office, and then we decline charges. So it really is a resource saver for all departments, for prosecution, for the court. And something important about that is that's a case that never requires the court or a defense attorney to touch. It's simply prosecutors and our staff here, our office assistants. So with that, that's the end of my PowerPoint. I don't know if Heidi, if you have more to add.
No, if you want to unshare or whatever you call it in Zoom world, I believe Councilmember Brandstetter has had his hand up for about half of our comments. We're happy to answer any questions.
Well, Ms. Walker, I just had a question regarding the explanation about the current controlled substances rule. And if I understood you correctly, you say that the responsibility to make a referral is the police officer's responsibility?
Yes, the way that the state law is written, the idea is that the police contact somebody, we would never even know the contact was made. And my understanding is that Chief Zarro is, along with others, I think AC Unfred has been involved in this as well. They have been coordinating with other jurisdictions, trying to make sure that they are on top of what the requirement is. And I don't think they're obligated to, for example, take the person to a facility or anything like that. They are obligated to provide information to the person and not, as I said, make an arrest. But I think Samantha has spent some time talking to them about this as well.
Yes, so specifically, I have been working with Chief Umfred and Chief Zarro and Assistant Chief Umfred on this. The first two contacts from law enforcement, they're not allowed to book on a possession of controlled substance charge. The police department has shared with us that those are normally attendant to some different kind of crime. So they're contacting someone for a theft, they find drugs on them. They are allowed to book on the theft charge, not on the controlled substance. The statute requires that they shall refer for services. So they have a little business card that has, gosh, I forget what the agency, but the police department is working on getting them printed if they have not already been printed to give to all patrol officers. It has a treatment agency, it has their phone number on the back of the card. It says what they do and what they don't do, and that's sufficient to satisfy the statute. The The officers are then directed to just write in their report that referral for services was made. At the third contact for that particular crime, they are allowed to book on the controlled substance charge and refer to the prosecutor for services. In order for me to file that charge, I have to be able to prove that the prior 2 contacts did result in a referral. But the police department's been really wonderful on making sure they'll be compliant with that statute.
And to be clear, that has been a significant challenge that would definitely apply to Lakewood. If you are a city out in the middle of the state with no other surrounding jurisdictions, you probably are the only jurisdiction there to be arresting these folks. When you are a city that is surrounded by other jurisdictions, it is a little more challenging to figure out how many times this person has been stopped or detained. It is not unusual for us to have people who have arrests in Tacoma, for example. And so the police are very aware of this, and they are being mindful that before they conclude that they've got a person for the 3rd time, it's either going to be somebody with whom they're very familiar or somebody for whom they take the time to really track down what their history is in terms of those contacts.
So you're saying there's no central repository for creating an inventory of contacts?
So we do use South Sound 911, and there's multiple different agencies throughout Pierce County that write reports. I know Assistant Chief Unfred, I don't want to speak for them, but we, in our brainstorm session, we're talking about having a specific title to a report that maybe officers could click that would be easily searchable by a name to pull up prior contacts, but I'm not certain if he's had those conversations or that's even something possible. But well, agencies that use South Sound 911, I don't know how officers would easily track that information.
Well, and the direct answer to your question, Mr. Mayor, is you're correct. There's not a central repository at the time that the law was adopted. And Ms. Johnson is correct that the city is doing everything it can to come up with a good stopgap for that. But you are correct. There's not a central repository, nor was one created with this law.
Yeah, it does seem that not having anybody responsible for counting to 3 is problematic in an area like Pierce County with 25 law enforcement jurisdictions to go on. Could you remind me what the difference in the potential punishment between a misdemeanor and an infraction is when the clock makes that change?
Oh, I believe it's July 2023. It will go from a simple misdemeanor, which maximum jail time for that is 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine, or both, to an infraction, and I'm not sure what the civil penalty is for the infraction. So there is a real concern that once we are able to gain traction and what I mean by gain traction is understand what we're dealing with, identify referrals, if they are prosecuted, whether or not by the time we get there, it will now have just been an infraction. Again, I mean, there's a lot of unknowns.
Infraction penalties are typically set pursuant to a fine schedule. There would be no jail involved. And so, in other words, the sum total of what is hanging over someone's head when they come before the court for an infraction is a fine. And maybe something on a record somewhere. Right now, what we have are driving records. I don't know that a civil infraction would go, obviously not on a driving record. That would go into your criminal record, but it would go on as a civil infraction.
And then based on another wonderful state Supreme Court decision, all I have to do is say, I'm poor, and they don't have to pay. So there's it's a free pass.
Yeah, so it's kind of like having too many clams in your bucket when the game warden finds you. But the fine schedule, did the legislature adopt the fine schedule when they did this, or is that a future action, or is that done by somebody else?
That's a future action, and they typically update those from time to time, and it's literally a whole schedule of all the infractions. Everything from seat belts to, I guess in the future, it would be possession of of controlled substance.
Okay, so, and then in the case of where a person is apprehended for multiple offenses, one of which is a controlled substance possession charge, but because of the other offenses, they do get booked. Does that count as also as a referral if the person is booked into the jail?
No, so the officer has to refer for services. It says, I believe it says behavioral health services, so it's not even specific to just like chemical dependency. However, if they hand them that card, that is sufficient, but booking them in is not sufficient.
So, but I'm saying if they book them and he's in jail and he's not able to use the card, is that?
I think it's just merely it's merely the giving of the resource, not the requirement that they follow through. I mean, they are allowed to have their property in jail, like it gets booked in with the custodian, and once they're released from jail, they can have their property.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I see a great coercive effect of handing somebody a card. It's certainly going to show up for treatment. I do have a question. I'm a fan of therapeutic courts, but I have a question with respect to the friendship court. You indicated that one of the common uses would be big box thefts where there was recovery of the items taken. From talking to people in the industry and law enforcement, people who steal from big box stores steal high ticket items regularly. They walk out with impunity. So somebody's doing this for a living and you catch him once. What's the program that's going to change that behavior? Why would that particular offense be a common referral to a therapeutic court?
That's a great question. So friendship diversion is not a therapeutic court in and of itself, but there is requirements for who I'm willing to refer. So I do have a friendship diversion referral and disposition standards. In there it indicates, we look into the individual's criminal history. They must have no or limited serious criminal history. If an adult, we go through in these standards, which I'd be happy to share with the council if you'd like me to give them to Ms. Schumacher when she's back. There's certain serious violent felonies that would disqualify them. If they're person-related crimes, so individuals accused of person-related incidents are ineligible for diversion where they have convictions or pending criminal matters, certain firearm convictions.
Right, I understand that, but I'm focusing in on somebody's a major committing a significant property crime, taking a $1,500 generator and rolling it out in the basket and putting in his truck. And you happen to recover it because he has it when he's stopped for a traffic offense. Why is that a candidate for diversion? And how are you going to change the pattern of behavior?
So that's a great question. It comes down to that prosecutorial discretion piece. And if there's somebody who is a community nuisance and does not seem to be amenable through, 8 hours of community service is going to deter future criminal behavior, that's not someone that I'm going to refer. So there's individuals that, you can find multiple, if not 20, 30 reports on them, or officers saying, I've reported to Lowe's in the last 2 weeks and this person's stolen 3 times. That's not the sort of person that the city is going to be diverting to this program or allowing them an opportunity to divert.
Well, and if I might just insert, what I hear is some policy considerations that we may want to give another look to. There are different views of the big box thefts as opposed to some of the other types of crime that we're spending our prosecution resources on, we'll go through and scrub and see what we've been sending to Friendship Diversion and see whether our standards are matching up to what I'm hearing from the council tonight, because that's it. There are different schools of thought on that, and we have not previously briefed the council sufficiently on what we were doing with the Friendship Diversion piece. There may be other cases that
it's just one of those, you know, and I may be totally off on this, but I did in my deep dark past have some prosecution experience. And there's what you know and what you can prove.
Mm-hmm.
And with big box theft, there's a lot of what you know, and you get one instance where you can prove it. And so it seems to be, it's markedly different from a deferral where somebody has a behavioral health or alcohol or drug problem, and you can change their behavior. So
we'll take a look at what we've been doing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Ms. Wachter, Ms. Johnson?
Nope. We just appreciate the chance to kind of give you the whole big show from beginning to end, and we appreciate the council letting us know some of the areas that are of interest to you, and we will proceed accordingly. Thank you.
We also appreciate the fact that every time you turn around, there's another case making your job tougher.
It's true. I just, on that note, I would just say that I do think we're seeing a trend, and it's been probably the better part of the last decade, of trying to find ways to take the folks who aren't really here for criminal reasons and get them lifted out of what's a criminal justice system, right? So if it's money, if it's dependency, if it's behavioral health, I think we're caught in the middle of that sort of transition to trying to find a better way to deal with some of those elements. And as you say, it comes out case by case rather than just a nice recipe for how to do that. And we will continue to work with it and communicating with you about how we're doing.
Well, thank you. Appreciate your update. So Ms. Wachter, you're still up. We have a review of the state law related to legal holidays.
Correct. And I believe that the wind beneath my wings on this one is our own Human Resources Director, Mary McDougall, who has been in communication with me tonight. I think she's around, although I think she is in a place without air conditioning. So it's possible that she melted sometime between the start of the meeting and now. So if she's able to join us, that's good. If she's here, I will just proceed to tell you that what you have before you is a way to adopt Juneteenth as a city holiday for the city of Lakewood. It's been adopted at the state level. It's been adopted at the federal level. We have not missed having a Juneteenth yet, because when it was adopted at the state level, it doesn't take effect until next year. And Mary has provided the information about what it generally means to have a holiday added. And so if you have questions about that, she's available to answer those. I did get one question in the intervening time that the underlying ordinance talks about a city holiday. And I don't think that was purely Scrivener's. It's from early cityhood when we were basically all operating out of City Hall. We didn't have a police department yet or anything like that. So if the council wishes to have that removed so that it simply is a city holiday that would impact the city, all of the city employees, we can make that change. But I would be looking for your direction on that, because I think that's actually what they meant when they passed it that way. So your Human Resources Director and I are here to answer any questions that you may have. And that's it on Juneteenth.
Any questions for Ms. McDougall or Ms. Wachter? Yes, my question is any element of this bargainable as far as employee compensation goes?
So I would say yes. So this would apply to non-represented employees if you decide to adopt this as a state or as a paid legal holiday for city employees. Our represented employees would need to bargain for the holiday, the paid holiday.
Yes, I'm not quite sure. I know that I understand your line of demarcation between represented and unrepresented on that. But I'll use an example with respect to unrepresented employees that I in no way would recommend, which is you get 240 paid days a year. It's a legal holiday. You have the day off, but we're now going to pay you for 239. If you want to be paid for 240, you have to give something else up. Is that an option either in a bargaining situation or by imposition on an unrepresented employees? You know, when the feds did a kind of a sleight of hand, if I recall correctly, when they implemented Martin Luther King Day, there was a lot of sleight of hand. A lot of people didn't get any more money, got a different day off. That wasn't the case in Washington, but it was in a variety of places. I guess the question is, what do we have to change something? Do we have to implement something, or does it just automatically happen that everybody gets one more paid holiday?
So, so you would have to adopt it as a paid holiday for city employees. Currently, we are not tied to the state or federal schedule. We have our own list of paid holidays. So if you choose not to adopt it as a paid holiday, it would just simply remain a work day and would not be a paid holiday for employees, if I'm understanding your question correctly. So
can
really,
we close and not pay people? That's my question.
pardon?
Could we recognize the holidays but not give people an extra day off? Have it at a different time.
So
You have to work Veterans Day.
So you could, so adopting it as a paid holiday as I guess means that yes, we would close and we would pay people for the holiday. If you don't want to do that, you would not need to adopt it as a paid holiday. You could simply have it be a recognized holiday. Again, Veterans Day is a paid holiday for us, but there are other holidays like Columbus Day that is not, so that we don't recognize as a paid holiday where we're closed. So we work on that day, and we could continue to do that for Juneteenth if you wanted, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Yeah, well, forget it. A lot of it's hypothetical. So it's basically, could you swap it out for some other benefit? I mean, so people have it off. You recognize it, they have the day off, but we get something else in return for that as an employer. If I'm a private enterprise, for example, and a totally different thing, you routinely give people the day after Thanksgiving off. You've given them the day after Thanksgiving off. And suddenly there's a state law that says, takes your discretion away and says, okay, you're going to have Juneteenth or some other holiday that's going to be recognized across the board. And you say, okay, we'll give you Juneteenth off and you're paid, but day after Thanksgiving is no longer a paid holiday. If you want it off, use a day vacation, PTO, whatever. You know, it's a count. We got 10 now. Can we, or whatever the number is, can we stay with 10 and make Juneteenth one of them? I guess that's a better way to put it.
Yeah, I think that is certainly a possibility if you wanted to maintain 10 paid holidays and just do that, that's a possibility. We were bringing forward an additional paid holiday for your consideration.
Okay, understand. I'm just asking if we have that option. Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe I can sum up what you're saying is essentially a zero-sum game as it relates to the current holidays that are currently in place for city employees. And now that we're adding another, that the number of paid holidays would be the same. It would just be, they would have to give up another holiday or something along those lines, if I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you if that's a legal option.
I believe it could be, but we could certainly look into it if that's what council would like us to do.
Because if it's a legal option, then when you're bargaining, you might be in a position to get some additional consideration for the 11th holiday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I would just go in and concede it. That's really where I'm going, is with respect to bargaining. Say, you know, everything, if it's bargainable and you have 10 holidays, saying we recognize Juneteenth, you're going to have Juneteenth off, or whatever your union has. You know, the cops have to rotate through; they have different rules. But is it on is staying at 10 paid holidays, Juneteenth being one of them, an option to try to gain some other concession that we want.
So, Mr. Mayor, what we would need in order to bring that forward is what the council is interested in entertaining. We can bring forward the option as it's presented, which is, as the Human Resources Director indicated, simply adding a holiday. We can bring something forward that makes it a sum total of number of holidays, from which it's more like a menu choice. And if somebody wants additional holidays, they would bargain for them. But we, what we are looking for at this point then is some type of direction from the council.
Yeah, and I'm in no way opposed to making Juneteenth a legal holiday. What I am opposed to is, whether it's the state legislature or the federal government, when you have limited resources in city government and you're bargaining for employee benefits in an inflationary uncertain time, saying, oh, by the way, you're going to have to spend money on this. Well, it could be any holiday. You're just adding. Some places only have 8. Some places have 15. But changing the number on us is a concern, because it costs money, and it's also a hidden cost to government, where somebody who's here for 20 years accrues and isn't using all their vacation time, ends up in a sum total accruing extra time because they can use that extra day off in place of a vacation day, and then we have a big liability at the end of the day that's unfunded. So there are unintended consequences.
So this isn't something that's imposed on us at all, though. So we're not tied to this. We're not tied to the state or the federal calendar. If we don't have to add this as a holiday, it's not something that we need to do. It's something that the state has done. So we're just bringing forward as an option. I just want to make that clear, that it's not being imposed on us.
Okay. Understand. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I've muddied it up. Any other questions? Mr. Bolte.
I'm trying to understand, wait a second. Am I on? Yeah. I'm trying to understand the fiscal note. So it says in one place it's 83,000, and then down farther, it says something like it's 21,000. On the next page, at the top of page 63, it's 21,000 or something. So what's the fiscal note on this?
So first, I just looked at what the cost was, the average cost for a holiday. So we look at when we pay holiday pay, what's the average cost of that? And that's the $83,000. But I just wanted to note that right now, it's not an additional cost, because we're paying people that, to work that day, whether it's a holiday, if they're working, we're paying people to work that day. The difference is when we add another holiday, then the people who in bargaining units who who are required to work on that holiday for 24/7 operations, such as police or some parks and things, they get a holiday premium pay for their contract. And so that's the additional 21,000. So that's the cost really of adding a holiday. The 83,000 is, we would be paying that already for people to work, but it's the cost of a holiday, a day of pay, basically. So.
Okay, so it's the $21,000 for the people who have to work, and we don't like to say this anymore, but in fact, essential workers.
Yeah, for those who have to work on, who are required to work on a paid holiday. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Ransfeder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McDougall. I guess, given the mayor's comment, and that if I read the summary correctly, we have 3 bargaining units that need to complete bargaining with this calendar year. Because of agreements that are ending, is that?
So we have one bargaining unit, the Police Guild, whose contract expired at the end of 2020, and we're currently still bargaining that contract. We have 2 more that expire at the end of 2021, and then one that expires at the end of 2022.
So that so by the end of 2021, we have essentially 3 CBAs that need to be bargained and hopefully come to an agreement and do that. And this could be and no matter what we do, this has to be an element of those.
It doesn't have to be, but we anticipate that if you adopt the holiday, they would request to also get the holiday. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So given that the next Juneteenth is in 2021, is there an urgency to do this in 2020 other than to inform our budget? And even then we wouldn't really know what's going on. I mean, could we retain our bargaining options and find out what employees wanted to do rather than unilaterally going through and doing this for unrepresented employees up front before those negotiations are concluded? I mean, could we do this next April?
So yes, you could do this next April. Yeah, the holiday is in June. I think it's helpful for us when we are negotiating to know whether that's going to be added or not. But yes, you don't have to make a decision now for next June, I guess.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to reports by the city manager. Thank you, Mrs. McDougall.
Mr. Mayor.
Wait, Linda Farmer's waving up here, so.
Sorry about that. I would prefer we act now. This is an historic change in our world, and the adoption of the holiday nationwide is a pretty amazing thing. And on a personal note, having worked for government for 15 years and having something come to the non-reps first, it's kind of amazing. So I am not opposed to us moving forward now.
Okay, anyone else? Ms. Bell, are you waving?
Mayor. Yes, I would agree. I prefer that we act now. I actually had Juneteenth off already this year and it was accepted. I went through and we worked with the bargaining units and it was really well received. And Councilmember Farmer's right, this is a historical moment and we need to move forward with it.
I was going to second that, but now that we've gone this point, I definitely would like to see it go forward.
So you have to third it, Mary. So, okay. Well, it'll come up for consideration shortly. Anything else on this issue? Seeing none, we go to city manager reports. Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd first like to call upon our strategic and long-range planning manager, Tiffany Spear. So if city clerk, if we could allow her in as a panelist. She would like to give the council an update on some discussions that we've been having with the city of Tacoma, who is taking the lead on acquiring the Comfort Inn over off of Hosmer, which is right on the boundary between Tacoma and Lakewood, to be used as an emergency shelter. In addition, they're partnering with Pierce County as well. And so the city of Lakewood has a unique opportunity to also partner here. And Ms. Spear has been serving point on us, working with both Tacoma and Pierce County on this. And she actually has a bit of a presentation, a walkthrough, talk through. And at the end, Mayor, what I'm looking for from you and your colleagues is direction for us to continue to participate in these discussions and actually be part of this acquisition and using ARPA funds to do so. So with that, Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'll start right away with the presentation. So obviously you're aware that the city of Lakewood has received or will be receiving over the next several years almost $14 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding. Once again, quick reminder that the rules of the game are to commit the funds by December 31st of 2024 and exhaust the funds by December 31st of 2026. There are 4 categories within the act itself as to how dollars could be spent. And in the March retreat that the City Council held, there were 3 policy positions made. First of all, using the dollars for one-time costs. Secondly, seeking community engagement response before making decisions really in how the majority of the funds will be spent. And then also a decision that 1% of the funds would be set aside for Community Service Advisory Board decisions and allocations. So as the manager just mentioned, right now the city of Tacoma and Pierce County are in negotiations with Lehigh Low Income Housing Institute regarding the purchase of the Comfort Inn at 86th and Hosmer. The intention is to use it as an emergency shelter as soon as it can open through 2023, and then use it as permanent supportive housing beginning in 2024 for at least 50 years, if not having a permanent deed restriction on the building. As it sits right now, the budget would be about a $10 million purchase. The city of Tacoma and Pierce County are both committed to putting $5 million toward that purchase price. The closing date is hoped for no later than October 29th of this year, but the intention is to actually have it close earlier if possible. If Lehigh were to sell the property at some point, which is not considered likely given their past performance, the jurisdictions involved would get either a share of the increase in the value at sale and or reimbursement of the funds initially used to help purchase the hotel. And there's also being a discussion right now about option for right of first refusal if the hotel were to be sold. So between now and the end of 23, there would be roughly 85 rooms available, which translates into 120 beds. Once it was converted to permanent supportive housing, there would be a slight reduction to 80 units. And again, the idea there is for at least 50 years, there would be a permanent supportive housing, if not permanently. There is a construction cost estimated at about $2.5 million. And the intention with the permanent supportive housing is to serve at or below 50% of area median income, which happens to be $45,500 for a family of 4. The operations budget, about $1.5 million as an emergency shelter. And then once it converts to permanent supportive housing, that cuts almost in half. The idea for the operational costs is that the Tacoma mental health tax, or the 1/10 of 1%, and also coronavirus emergency services grants dollars would be used. And then once it was converted to permanent supportive housing, some portion of the county's document recording fee could be used toward operational costs. It is possible for the city of Lakewood to jump into this negotiation. And so I had a preliminary discussion with representatives of the county and the city last week. And so this is why it's before you this evening. And at this point, the option is available for the city to either provide dollars toward the purchase itself, or perhaps to assist with emergency shelter operation costs. And then as a result of that support, having a certain number of beds set aside for Lakewood individuals. The way it would practically work is up until a certain time of evening each day, there would be beds set aside. And then after that time, if they were not taken by the Lakewood individuals, then they would be opened to other needy people. ARPA funds can be used for this purpose, and the discussion has initially been using $1 million from Lakewood's ARPA allocation. That is proportional to the $5 million Tacoma has committed. They received about $60 million in ARPA funds, and again, Lakewood is at about $14 million. Over time, there's the option to use some of Lakewood's affordable and supportive housing sales tax credit, which was enacted a few years ago and generates an estimated $97,000+ per year. There's also the option to use CDBG dollars or a portion again of the county's mental health tax for operations cost over time. The city of Tacoma is pursuing a state rapid acquisition program grant, and if they will be successful in that acquisition of that grant, then the purchase cost for the hotel would go down for everyone. The recommendation to council is that Lakewood does participate in this purchase or this operation or both. First and foremost, it is right on the edge of the city, and there is a lot of overlap of where individuals needing emergency housing are locating themselves on a day-to-day basis. But this is also a wonderful opportunity for those one-time dollar expenditures that the city council identified in its retreat for the use of ARPA monies for emergency shelter or other types of housing. So I'll stop sharing there. And as the manager said, we're looking for direction from council as to whether we should continue these discussions with other jurisdictions.
So I would add, I have a little bit more to add on this. I actually brought this as an opportunity to a city manager, kind of a byproduct of my day job. Some clarifications. The Tacoma initially approached the county on a 50-50 split for capital, indicating that Tacoma would cover all the ongoing operational costs. So it is a little bit of concern if they're talking about the future commitment to operational costs. They indicated as a part of their pitch that they had that covered. I noticed the county executive's desire to make any such investment a one-time investment and not an ongoing obligation. I would suggest that if we consider going forward on this, do the same. There is a potential. I have personally reviewed the purchase and sale agreement that Lehigh has with the owner. I've seen a number of these recently. This one is by far the most favorable from a real estate acquisition standpoint. It's under the some people were trying to gouge entities both in King County and Pierce County by unloading bad hotels at exorbitant prices. This one is well under replacement cost, and it seems to be in pretty good shape. So from a real estate standpoint, it's not bad. From a public safety standpoint, it's blocked from it's 100 yards from Lakewood, but it's blocked from Lakewood by the freeway. We have leakage of trouble. That area is a very troubled area from a law enforcement standpoint now, between the 72nd and 96th on the Tacoma side of the freeway. Mr. Caulfield, I think, has not so jokingly suggested that blocking the 96th Street underpass, would be Lakewood's wall. It would be, this actually may increase Tacoma police presence in the area for security, which would have the salutary effect of policing the area to the extent it isn't policed now. And that would help Lakewood. It also has the effect of giving us a method of complying with the Boise case, which indicates that in order to quote unquote criminalize, camping on a sidewalk, for example, you have to have a place for people to go. I personally am of the opinion that the idea of converting it to permanent supportive housing within 2 years is overly ambitious. It may maybe run as a shelter for a longer period of time than that, because that transition and the services that are involved are a little more difficult. But it does present an enticing opportunity. Think of it as the McGavick Center, where we put in some capital and we have some preferred use, but we aren't responsible for paying the utilities or the janitorial services or whatever goes with McGavick Center. So that's what I can add. I see Mr. Branstetter has a question, comment. Mr. Branstetter.
My comment is that I would be in favor of giving the city manager the go-ahead that he asked for to engage in these negotiations and to consider that doing it as a one-time use of ARPA dollars on the scale that was suggested by Ms. Spear, that would be appropriate. I think that, while we wanted to make sure that we use our ARPA dollars based on some impact from community input, this is a topic that we've had a lot of community input over the years about the lack of a accessible emergency shelter. And so I wouldn't expect community input to run counter to that. So to the extent that you're looking for a consensus, Mr. Mayor, I'd be in favor of giving the city manager the go-ahead.
Mr. Volkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess it's one thing to put the capital in, but we see from recently the youth shelter down there at the Beacon Center that nobody wants to pay the long-term costs of operations. And so, or it becomes difficult. And so I really want to try to understand. It's one thing to cut the check, great, to help them buy this place, but it's another to really determine long-term who's going to pay for what. Because in the Beacon Center case, the group that was running it walked away from it because they were just flat out losing money. So so why is Lehigh different? And how is this conversion made to permanent supportive housing? And what does that mean? Permanent supportive housing, in my mind, means the seats get filled, the beds get filled, and then we don't have any more room. So, maybe I'm not understanding that nomenclature. A shelter, the people move in and out. Permanent supportive, they go there, and are they there for years? So I need to understand that we're not, because I don't quite understand where we're going to pay for it operationally going forward. So I'll leave it for any answers I can get there.
Well, my personal preference is if we go forward on it, it's a one-time capital contribution without any commitment for ongoing costs. Because the way this actually came up was Tacoma indicating they were going to pick up the tab for the operational costs. They were looking for help on the capital contribution. And I think that's I don't know what the county council will do, but I know that's the message that's going to come with any positive recommendation from the executive. Ms. Farmer.
Councilmember Boki took the words right out of my mouth, having just spent days digging into the IGA. On our first topic on the agenda, the devil's always in the details, and I'm also interested in knowing about the long term and the long haul. I think could be a great thing moving forward, but I would hate to see it fall apart in a couple of years because people walk away. It's fun to do the sexy big purchase. Ooh boy, look what we did! But when it comes to M&O, nobody wants to do that. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
Anyone else? Do we have a consensus that it's advisable for staff to go forward and explore this further? Ms. Moss.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would concur with that. I think we need to do something to show that we are doing our part to help our people that are homeless and that. So I'm not in favor of that.
All right. So we got thumbs up, positive comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have some guidance.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And yes, I'd just like to add on the M&O side, that is something that we too have had a discussion internally. And this council, if it came to that, does have some options. You have the 1406 funding, the sales tax dollars that could be used. Also, the CDBG funding that the city receives on an annual basis would be a source of funding that could be used here. And then there's also the 0.1% Pierce County mental health sales tax that the county recently implemented, of which they're collecting money in Lakewood, and we could also, we could certainly pursue some of that funding through our Pierce County council members. So from an M&O standpoint, there are some funding sources that very viable funding sources that could be used. But again, Mayor and Council, thanks for your direction here that allow us to at least be at the table here to talk about this. And then once we have some more information, we'll be sure to bring that back to you. Some other quick updates. I know last time I brought up the need for a city council picture. And so council, if all of you are available either on July 12th or July 19th, that would probably be a good optimal day to be able to take a photo and maybe show up at 6:15 or 6:30 or so, and we can get that done. Also, Summerfest. Unfortunately, no Summerfest this year. I don't know if you know this, but we typically start the Summerfest planning right after the last Summerfest ended. So we're actually beginning to plan for Summerfest 2022 right now, and even though it's not quite July yet. But one of the things that we are looking is moving it from the second Saturday in July 2022, because that is like the same week as Independence Day is next year. And there's just a lot happening within that week. And so what we are looking is moving it from, traditionally it would have been on July 9th. And so we're looking at the fourth Saturday, which would be July 23rd. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And we've been getting a lot of positive feedback from vendors and other, other stakeholder groups that we've been working with on that. Speaking of Independence Day, wanted to let you know we continue to work with the West Pierce Fire and Rescue District, just communicating, what the law is, if you will, as it relates to the discharge of fireworks here in Lakewood, but also pointing out that beginning next year, the discharge of fireworks will only be allowed on July 4th, on Independence Day itself, and also on New Year's Eve as well. That hasn't changed. But just wanted to let you know we continue to do that and get the word out via different forums between both the city and the fire district. I'm also pleased to announce that we are going to be submitting a $5.1 million grant request for a Defense Community Infrastructure Program grant, DCIP, and that's in support of phase 2 of the JBLM North Access Project, which is essentially Washington Boulevard to Edgewood to Northgate Road to the boundary of JBLM. And one of the key components of that application was having a letter from the JBLM itself stating that this is a key and high priority for them. And we were able to get the letter and the language that we wanted and needed. And so that will be front and center as part of our application, and want to express our thanks to JBLM, particularly the garrison commander over there, Colonel Sky Duncan and his team for accommodating us on this. It's a quite a big deal. We had our first drive-in movie this last Friday on June 25th. It was The Goonies, and if you haven't ever seen the movie The Goonies, it's a very entertaining one. But we did do a push, particularly on social media, to get the word out, and we ended up with about 115 vehicles. We had space for 160. I'm sure that kind of maybe the hot weather might have played into it a little bit. We do want to thank Twin Star Credit Union for not just sponsoring the movie, but also all the goodies that they passed out to all the participants. We have a great working relationship with them, and they do a lot of great things here in Lakewood. Also, many of the families and people who came by and watched the movie complimented as they were actually at the movie, as well as when they were leaving, to our staff. And speaking of our staff, want to thank Cameron Fairfield, Elizabeth Scheid, and Mike Nebecker for all of their work, as well as a number of other recreation staff for pulling off this great event. The next movie is going to be on Friday, July 9th, and it will be the movie Coco. So we do again have spots for 160 vehicles, and again, looking forward to doing that. Couple of things, kind of maybe working backwards here. I think it was last week or the week before, I let council know that we were going to be recommending the financing of body-worn cameras for the Lakewood Police Department, and that we would be bringing that forward as part of the mid-biennial budget adjustment. However, myself and the chief, we have had a change of heart, and we would like to bring that forward for council consideration in July. And we're looking at a study session on July 12th, followed by council consideration as part of your July 19th council meeting. We've already done the work in terms of what the cost is. The request will be funding for a 5-year period. And the reason for a 5-year period is because that equals the amortization of the capital cost, the investment of the 80 cameras that are needed, coupled with the IT, the video storage technology stuff that we need in the background. And then there are going to be some ongoing costs. I know I covered last week that totals about $325,000 a year. So over a 5-year period, it's 1.9, rounding up $2 million. And my recommendation is that that be funded with ARPA monies, which is an allowable cost. And again, wanted to let you know that we're going to, unless the council has any objection, we would like to bring that forward for, again, discussion and review on July 12th, and then hopefully city council consideration on July 19th, so then we can get the body cameras up and operational by the end of this year, if not sooner. We also have Chief Zaro on the line if the council would like to get an update on the homicide that occurred on, I know we had sent out some information and I had called you on the homicide that occurred at American Lake Park this past weekend, that resulted in us in having to shut down the park for the remainder of that evening, but also on Sunday. We did reopen the park at noon today. And so it'll be back open for regular hours beginning tomorrow. Also wanted to let you know that our Parks Department and Police Department will be working on some, I guess, operational or safety plan issues to ensure that both American Lake Park and Harry Todd Park are safe and secure for all visitors. Unfortunately, we have just like with anything, we have a small group of folks that are just creating some problems and issues. And I was really happy to hear, the city council ask PREB to take the lead on that. And we can certainly work that process through them. In addition, I've asked the Parks Department to look at, as a part of that, if there are long-term capital improvements that are needed to accommodate that. And this would be the perfect time to do that, since we are finalizing the design for the ADA improvements and other improvements down at American Lake Park that are expected to break ground later this year or early 2022. That will probably result in some additional funds, but I think just given the need that exists down there, I'm sure we'll be able to accommodate that and find the funds there. So just wanted to give you an update on that. But with that, Chief Zarro has been sitting here for over 3 hours, and thank you, Chief, for doing that. But Chief, if you have anything to add regarding the homicide and the investigation, or any other questions that the council may have for you. So with that, Chief Zarro.
Well, the one thing I'll point out, even though I'm in my office, the air conditioning in the station was out for the last about 4.5 hours. So it's not as comfortable as it would have normally been, but the HVAC guy just left along with Scott Williams and got it working, and we're slowly cooling off. So I would be happy to answer any questions. I think everybody has sort of the general story about what happened. I will tell you that for having an officer actually in the park when it happened is troubling, and to hear about what Sergeant Frazier went through, during and after, with trying to not only get out information over the air for about the suspect who took off running, but try to coordinate getting medical aid to the scene, trying to provide CPR himself, and on top of all that, having a crowd surrounding him and yelling at him that he wasn't doing enough, that it was his fault, was a lot for him to take. So that was all contributed to the decision to shut the park down for a day, to have what is essentially maybe a cooling off period until we can make sure that not only the park goers safe, but our officers are safe when they're there responding to problems. The suspect, as you know, is in custody and has been charged with first-degree murder. I don't want to not extend our condolences to the Gorman family, who lost a loved one in all this. And for as much talk as we have about people needing the park being opened to cool off and everything else, there's a family out there that's grieving the loss of a loved one because of this incident. And I think that gets kind of lost in some of the other political issues that have been discussed. But what was mentioned earlier it's kind of good that I was here listening to what the Parks Board had to say, because I'll echo one thing they said, is that some of the issues we're dealing with are not unique. I've spoken with the chief up at Bonnie Lake, and they have Allen York Park that's on Lake Tapps there, and they deal with a lot of the same issues, and they've implemented some operational changes to help mitigate some of the crowd and issues that they deal with. And we're looking at some of the same potential changes here. And we're working on that with the Parks Department and the legal department to make sure that what we're doing is legal, but also that what we're doing is ultimately in the interest of the safety of our park goers. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Mr. Mayor.
Questions for Chief Zarro? Ms. Moss.
Yeah. Chief, do we know what led up to this confrontation?
By all accounts, the suspect was looking for a fight, by what witnesses described his behavior as. He had been harassing a younger person in the park earlier, and when that younger person's 20-year-old uncle showed up to pick him up, he was told that this guy was harassing him. When he went up to confront him, the person pulled out a gun and shot him. So it was literally that quick and that inconsequential of an altercation.
And they were from Burcrest and Steilacoom?
Correct. The suspect had a Steilacoom address, and the victim, Mr. Gorman, had a Fircrest address.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the chief? So there was another incident. Was it yesterday? Juvenile shot someone in Bridgeport, and
It was on Filbert Lane, just off of Bridgeport. It was a confrontation in the roadway, essentially. That was, again, the confrontation itself was inconsequential, but the juvenile, he was 16, not 14. I had the age wrong earlier when I emailed you, but 16-year-old pulled out a gun and shot the victim and hit him twice, but fired 5 rounds in a very crowded neighborhood. So lucky that, and I even hate to say that we're lucky that, you know, when one person gets shot, but fortunate that those rounds that didn't hit him didn't hit a house and somebody else that was in there, that we don't have more victims. But that person was found. He had fled and was found by patrol officers and taken into custody later.
were those, do you have any indication whether those folks were known to each other?
I don't. I think at least they had a cursory acquaintance, but not a close friendship, I don't believe, or close acquaintance.
Any other questions for the chief?
All right. Well, thank you all. We'll be out this next weekend, 4th of July. We'll be out on the 3rd and the 5th. And since we're here at the, in the public meeting with everybody watching, remember, save them for the 4th. The new law doesn't go into effect till next year, but might as well, start this year and get in the practice that if you are going to light off fireworks, at least, one, be safe, but also save them for the 4th of July. We will be out on the 3rd and the 5th, just trying to educate people on the change in the law for next year. So with that, I will wish you all a good night.
Thank you. Good night. Back to you, Mr. Caulfield.
Lastly, Mayor and Council, want to let you know that myself and Mr. Buer and Ms. Newton we're going to be meeting with RPAI, I think on Wednesday or Thursday, to talk about the possibility of a downtown park. So hopefully by the end of the week, I'll have an update for you that I can share with.
Great.
That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the city manager? We'll go to council comments. Ms. Moss.
Mr. Mayor, I'm good.
Mr. Branstetter.
I would note that I visited the cooling center in the council chambers both yesterday and today. It was being used. It was organized and staffed primarily by folks from West Pierce Fire and the CERT teams that they have trained. And the folks who were there were very appreciative of it being there. Most who came there by car from their homes where they didn't have air conditioning and needed some cooling for themselves, and it was a range of ages from children to older folks. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to commend the city and the staff for opening up the cooling center, getting the information out there for the residents, and I'm glad it was utilized. And also really, really proud of all the efforts that were made to open up American Lake Park again today, despite everything.
Ms. Farmer.
I'm good, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Bulkey.
I'm good, Mayor.
Well, Thursday, I virtually attended the Puget Sound Regional Council board meeting. It was uneventful for once. We didn't spend millions of dollars. And I have never been accused of being cool, and now I can honestly say That's confirmed. I'm not cool. But I hope you are. If there's nothing further to come before us tonight, we're adjourned.
Good night.
Yep.